All right, all right, all right. Happy Friday to you all. Happy Friday to you all. This is a members only podcast, so I don't have to go through the whole scenario thing that I usually do as far as telling people if they've never been to the show before, this and that. I don't have to do that, which is pretty awesome actually, because that long introduction thing it's pretty old sometimes. How's everybody doing tonight? Like I said last time, I can't ever tell who's in here and who's not because it won't allow me to see anything. So if you're in here, make sure you say hello. Come in the chat and say, "Hey, 12 gauge, what's up?" I'd really appreciate it. Well, anyways, I decided to make this members only podcast tonight because I haven't treated y'all to your own live in a while. So I thought I'd get on here and go over some stuff. I know I'm an hour early, but hopefully people start showing up in here. But I'm going to go ahead and begin, like the lab says, or like the title says. My bad. Let's go to the lab. And that's exactly what we're going to do tonight. Is we're going to go to the lab. We're going to learn how to do certain things, visualize certain things, and understand how a crime scene really goes down. There's plenty of short videos that I have lined up. Let me go ahead and put the disclaimer out there. I will be commenting on videos that other people have made, so this is just under fair use. So that is that. I might as well have recorded this because I don't know if anybody's going to show up in here tonight. I hope they do. I mean, I have like 16 members now, so this chain is kind of bugging me a little bit. But let's start off with the first one. This is actually one from my state. It's about the Texas crime scene investigation by the Texas Rangers. So they're going to go through showing you how they investigate a crime scene. So here we go. Let's listen to these guys.
When a Texas Ranger is called to a crime scene, how do they collect the clues that help them capture a criminal? You'll see how science, math, and photography can help solve a murder mystery.
When we're called to a crime scene, our objective is to collect and preserve the evidence so that it can be used in court at some point in time. We'll take a video camera and we'll videotape the entire scene. And what it does is It provides a permanent record for what we see when we walk in. And that is used in court to give the jury an idea of what the crime scene looked like as we approached it and first began our investigation.
As you can tell, he's not wearing a white suit. He's not wearing a white suit. He is wearing booties, but he's not decked out in all the white stuff that people assume these investigators wear when they're first onto the scene.
We take still photographs to completely and totally document the crime scene. But I always think in my mind, if something happens and we don't find whoever did this, if in 40 years, if an investigator picks up this file and they want to reopen this case, will they be able to look at my photographs and be able to step back in time and feel like they're in the room? So when I take photographs, I take a lot of photographs. I take pictures of items in that room that may be insignificant to me at the time, but in 40 years, someone else looking back on that may be very significant.
After
And that is great. That is a great attitude to have, to be thorough with your duty and make sure that you're giving the next generation of investigators something to look at in case you can't solve the crime. And like she said, in 40 years, you just never know if, this crime has been unsolved for that long. Somebody's going to have to look at your stuff.
we did the videotaping and the photography, I used what's called alternate light source. Now, this alternate light source puts out different waves of light, and light is measured in waves, and the different wavelengths create different colors. And the color that you saw me using today was blue, and the goggles that you saw me wearing were yellow. And when I combine these two colors together, it filters out certain wavelengths of light and allows me to see physical evidence that may be on the body or at the crime scene that I'm not able to see with the naked eye. We call this trace evidence. So the purpose of gathering physical evidence, and particularly trace evidence, is to be able to determine who may have been at this crime scene, which helps us determine who committed the crime.
And that's awesome that they're able to take a light source like that and look for evidence that is not visible to the naked eye, because, there's always possible evidence everywhere when you walk into a crime scene.
We have the markers that are numbered 1 through however many we need. We place them within a crime scene to document evidence that is going to be within that crime scene. Placing the markers helps you to organize your evidence. So when you document it on paper, you can correspond a number with the item. There is a scale on the edge of each marker. You place the marker parallel with the item of evidence. That assists you whenever you take photographs. You can get an accurate measurement of whatever that piece of evidence is. We do a scale diagram of each crime scene. We would use tape measures, and we would run an x-axis and a y-axis. Your x-axis is going to be your baseline. Your y-axis is going to be how you measure your points off of your x-axis. You'll be able to tell distance between items of evidence and
if you've watched any of my earlier videos, you've seen me talk about how measurements are important when it comes to a crime scene investigation. It gives you the parameter of where the perpetrator could have been compared to the victim who has fallen to the ground right there.
pieces of furniture in the room, doorways, windows.
When we do our sketch, we'll know exactly how they fit and where they are in relation to other things that are in the room.
A fingerprint is always something that we look for. And we always look in common areas such as doorknobs or locks, anywhere where anyone would have touched something to enter in or exit a room.
We swab for DNA in areas that we normally look for fingerprints also.
DNA is your biological fingerprint. Everyone's is different, except for if you have an identical twin, then that twin will have the same DNA as you. You can find DNA in saliva. You can find it in blood. You can find it from skin cells, from where anyone touched a surface. We swab the area in question, and then we put it back into a portion of the envelope, and then we secure it and seal it inside of another envelope. Once the crime lab gets them, they will remove them from the package in a sterile environment, and they will test them for DNA. And there's a possibility of 3 people coming up with DNA on one swab from a doorknob. But our crime lab has the technology to be able to separate those DNAs into separate individuals.
And see, that's awesome because, many times people say, well, why wasn't there more DNA in this one case? How come there was just a partial DNA found? And you're like, well, after it separated all the DNA, this was the DNA that was found to be this person of interest.
When the evidence collected is combined with other investigative work, such as suspect interrogations and forensic sketches, a case can then be taken to trial.
Your integrity is the thing that shines through when you go to court. The defense oftentimes will try and attack the integrity of the officer who's doing the investigation in order to create reasonable doubt and get their client off. When you have integrity in everything that you do, then it makes it very difficult for them to make that case.
We owe it to the victims.
And do you hear what he said? He said they will be attacking the integrity of the investigator. Trying to create reasonable doubt. So that's the job of most people on the defense, is to attack the integrity of the investigation. So that is interesting right there. I knew that in a sense, but I didn't know that was a tactic for all cases,
We owe it to society. We owe it to the people of the state of Texas to find the truth and to make sure whoever is responsible for whatever crime is prosecuted and convicted.
Well, that concludes the first. If these were slides, this would be the first slide. So, as you can see, it's very, very articulate. It's very meticulous. And to say that people are going to risk their careers to plant things or to lie about certain things, that is foolish to think about. You're really going to risk your career to plant evidence, to give people false reports. It is foolish to think that anybody would do that. And not only one person, but if people out here in these streets, they want us to believe that 3 separate agencies would be willing to, in this one case, would be willing to jeopardize their careers, which some people have been in these careers for over decades, 2 decades, almost 3. And they're willing to jeopardize their careers to lie, to corrupt, or to plant evidence. I honestly believe that people don't listen to what they say. or they believe, you know. Hey, Stevie, let me read your messages right quick. That way I can answer before I start the next video. Great night off. Just got back from date night with the wife and the kid. Awesome. Awesome. I have a 9-year-old daughter who's my little homie. She debates me better than most adults I find on YouTube. That's usually how it goes, bro. That's usually how it goes. You ask how I was doing. I'm doing pretty well. I got home. I got off work early, and I kind of took a nap. So I'm up and going, you know, trying to present this stuff so that you guys could have a members only instead of, you know, because I haven't done it in a while. So I thought I'd give you guys the opportunity to see how these things are done based on education rather than myth. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, like I was saying, you know, when it comes to, let me take that page off. When it comes to the integrity of the investigation, you're going to see another video that I'm going to present that these individuals have done. One of them is going to be talking about the evidence gathering, how they process the evidence, how they document the evidence. And it's going to show you where the evidence is stored, how it's stored, how it's documented, you know. So in people's minds, hey, Rondi, in people's minds, they believed, or they want you to believe, that law enforcement is corrupt, that they don't handle their business, that in this investigation of the Idaho 4, and that's what I always talk about because that's the most, in my opinion, that's the most a viable example of what I'm talking about right now. How people believe that there's law enforcement that didn't do their job, or that this one agency was capable of gathering together to say that we're going to frame this one individual. And it just really baffles me to even go there, or to say that there's no evidence. And when I show you tonight how these individuals go thoroughly to document this evidence, you're going to understand that maybe it's difficult to put every little piece of evidence into a document that is only meant to give probable cause, not meant to show everything that's going into the trial. Well, let's begin with this one. This one's going to talk about dusting for prints. Okay, so let me show you this one. This one's pretty interesting.
National Forensic Academy, and what I'm going to demonstrate to you is how to use a non-magnetic fingerprint powder to possibly develop latent fingerprints. One of the first things we want to do, the application of this, if we're going to process, the surface is very important, and normally we'll do this, we'll use a non-magnetic powder if we have a nice smooth surface. For a rough surface, something like that, we'll select a magnetic powder. When you take a brush out, a new brush, this is a new fiberglass brush that has just numerous filaments. This is not the way we want the brush to appear when we get ready to load it with powder. So this is the way it comes out when it comes out of these containers. This is also how we recommend that you store them back in the same container that it came in. But when you take this out, you take the brush and you're just going to kind of break it in by taking it and spinning it like this. And once we do that, we want this thing to open up and appear more like a dome. Now we're starting to get the appearance, the shape that we want. And I don't quite like the way that looks, so if I could just spin it a little bit more, that may help keep the powder. It'll adhere to these filaments, but it won't clump up so much, and it'll be more evenly distributed. But we're going to take the brush like that. I'm just going to lay it down for a second. And I'm going to take a little bit of this.
And one of the areas that you noticed, I'm using this Idaho case tonight as an example, okay? I know y'all get tired of hearing about it, but I'm going to use it as an example because y'all are well-versed in it. Y'all understand the case. You've seen pictures of people dusting for prints. So this is one of the examples of how people actually dust for prints and how they gather them. So, people have the delusion that, or illusion. I'm going to say illusion, that whenever you're trying to categorize evidence or you're trying to gather evidence, that people are sloppy and they don't know what they're doing. So let's watch what this individual does. He's good at what he does.
Non-magnetic powder. And I would take a spoon. This is like a sterile spoon or a clean spoon. And I'm going to put a little bit of powder in this cup. And after I use this, it's just a small amount of powder. And after I use it, I'm not going to put this powder back into this original container just because of any type of contamination issues. They also make these brushes that are disposable. They have one-time application use, and then you can get rid of them if you're worried about any type of DNA or cross-contamination. But if we're primarily just processing for fingerprints, that's not such a consideration. We'd reuse this brush. And occasionally people will tell, when they're teaching people how to load a brush, they actually have this brush taken and placed down into this original jar. This is not a good reason because of the contamination issues. The other reason is it continues to compact the powder in the jar, and that's not what we want to happen. So if we take that out, put a small amount of powder into the cup, and we take the brush and put it into the cup like this and just lightly tap it. And then we're going to take that and we're going to spin it, raise it up off of the bottom, and I'm going to spin it by doing that. And then with this brush like this, I'm going to tap the edges. Now I've got more than enough powder on this new brush to process quite a large area. I'm going to take it, and techniques vary. Some people like to spin a brush. Some people like to actually move the brush back and forth like this. I'm just going to spin it a little bit like this and go across this surface. And what we have is the development of some latent prints. Latent prints mean that they were invisible initially, and after processing, we now have the development of these prints. Now, we don't want an excessive amount of powder on there. You may be able to see this. If not, we'll get a little closer view of it in a minute. But now we have a nice black print on this smooth surface. So what this is reacting to the sebaceous material in the print. And you can notice that there's no excess powder on the areas that were actually not touched. So this gives us very good information for an examiner to use. Another thing they make, this is a piece of equipment that is actually used for lightly putting a little bit of air pressure on electronic equipment. We also use this to simply blow any excess powder off. This gets used typically a little bit more with the magnetic powders, but that's what we do with this. We wouldn't dare blow on this because then we're imparting our DNA on it if that became an issue. So that's why we use that squeeze bulb. But that's how we process using a non-magnetic powder. It's good on these very smooth surfaces. And our comparison is going to end up with a black print on a white background. That's what we're looking at for the comparison purposes. So it's always nice to create a nice black print on a white background initially. So we like to use black powder quite often. We're at the...
Isn't that awesome, guys? I mean, I was watching these today and I thought, man, these are some very informative videos, and they're not so hard to understand. They're not so difficult that you can't understand them, and they're very, very thorough. That you can really understand what they're talking about and how they're going through the process of lifting fingerprints. And that is only one of many ways that they can lift prints, they can lift tracks, they can lift all kinds of things. So, did you see how clear those fingerprints came up as he was dusting that? He had no problem. You can tell he'd been doing that for a while, Let me see what Jar's saying before I move on. Exactly. I like the demonstrations also. Yes, you're going to see one. And I'm going to go ahead and say this before I show you one later on that's really awesome. Is sometimes you have to recreate a crime in order to learn from that recreation on how to solve a crime. It's almost like, how are you going to learn how something is done unless you do it? You get what I'm saying? Like, practice it. So this other video that I'm going to show you here in a little while is recreating a crime. And I thought, man, that is so awesome the way they did that. And this is going to go over tire tread and tire track evidence. So as we know, on the Idaho 4 case, there were tire tracks in the front of the house. And we have seen, investigators out there with their gear measuring those tire tracks. And this is going to show you the importance of the tire tracks and how they get the area of the tire track so they can see exactly how to match it up to the suspect's tires. So let's go ahead and then watch this one.
Today you will learn about tire tread and tire track evidence. So you may be wondering, what's the difference between tire treads and tire tracks? Well, it's really pretty simple. Tire tread evidence deals with the design and dimensions of an individual tire on a vehicle. Tire treads are a form of impression evidence, where an object is pressed against a soft surface so that the surface is stamped with the shape and details of the object. Tire tread impressions can be analyzed very closely. For example, a tread from an accident or crime scene can be compared with a tire tread from a suspect vehicle to try to identify a match. Tire tracks, on the other hand, refer to all of the tire patterns created by the car as a whole, rather than analyzing the tread pattern of one tire specifically. Tire track evidence deals with the spatial relationships between two or more tires, which can be helpful when trying to determine the dimensions of the suspect car. This is an example of tire tread evidence, where you're able to analyze the design features of an individual tire. This is an example of tire track evidence.
See, so look at all the difference in the tire marks. And they're able to tell which direction they went out, right rear, right front, left rear, left front. So they're able to tell which direction. So the left front and the right front went out like this, and so on and so on. It's really interesting because I know that if I was going to commit a crime, and I've never really thought of committing one, but if I was going to commit a crime, I would probably forget about the vehicle. Because how are you really going to escape what the vehicle does? I mean, you can't lift it up and smooth out the tires. You can't, I guess you could put something on the tires, but it would be making a lot of noise as you took off, And in this case, I've heard that not long after the crime, the suspect in question went and got new tires. And I don't know how accurate that statement is, but I've heard that throughout the years, that he went and got brand new tires for his vehicle. So did he destroy the tires that could have been on the Elantra if he was the one that night? Most possibly. So that would be a hard part of evidence to overcome, just like the gloves I was showing you last night. Because you can try to be smarter than law enforcement. You really can. And sometimes it works. Sometimes you're able to do so. But there's another area that you're putting so much energy in one area that you slip up in another one because you're not thinking as clearly through every step. So if you're putting so much emphasis in don't leave DNA, don't leave blood, don't leave, you know, a tire track, or don't leave this or don't leave that, well, you're gonna forget about the knife sheath. You're gonna forget about, you turned your phone on when you didn't need to turn it on. Could have kept your phone off the whole time. You didn't have to turn your phone off south of Blaine by Genesee. And I'm just paraphrasing there. I don't want y'all fact checkers to come in here and start telling me how and where it was, because I do know. I've heard the PCA and I've read it. I'm just paraphrasing. So instead of people fact checking me, I don't want y'all to do that. I mean, I understand it. But I would think that if the individual would have left his phone off the whole time, he might have not had any issue at all. Turned his phone, if he turned it off when he left it off the whole time, and then turned it back on at his house, he would have a lot more viable option to discuss about where his phone was rather than driving around stargazing. Yeah, I've definitely heard that. And obviously, not many people have knowledge about the possible use of tires as evidence, except maybe criminologists. Yeah, most people don't. When you talk about this, and I have other videos on tires and things like that, they don't want to hear it. People don't want to hear it, and that's fine. But you have to understand, evidence is evidence. You can't deny the fact that there are certain ways to get caught. And these are ways that most people don't think about. They take for granted these areas, and these are the little things that get them caught.
As you can see here, you can look at the spatial relationships between two or more tires. So let's talk about some of the things you can analyze and learn from tire treads. This is a list of some of the main pieces of information that forensic investigators can learn from analyzing tire treads. You can determine tread design, the type of noise treatment the tire has, tread wear features, and any other individualizing characteristics the tire tread may have. When I say tread design, I'm talking about the design features that make up the pattern of the tire. These design elements are separated by grooves in the rubber that run across the tire. These grooves have a few names, including slots or transverse grooves. You can also analyze a tire tread to look at tread wear indicators, which are raised bars of rubber that indicate how much a tread has worn down. These can be some great points of comparison when trying to match tire tread marks. One other thing that you can look at with tire treads is the type of noise treatment the tire has. In order to talk about this, we have to have a little bit of background info first. When a car is moving, the tires rotate and undergo stress from the load or weight of the vehicle. This stress causes the tire treads to vibrate and produce different pitches or noise.
Well, think about this. I'm about to show you this, but think about this next part, this part right here. Since the vehicle was caught supposedly on camera, driving the car would have left the pitch of the tires rolling. So you don't think that they used the tire marks plus the pitch that they heard on the camera to determine what kind of tires were on this vehicle? And if these tires were on the vehicle, they kept building from there. I mean, it's not very difficult. You have this car on video, you have the tire marks supposedly as the car left in a very fast pace. And then you have the camera that's recording everything, so you know that camera heard the pitch of this car. And listen to these pitches of these tires.
So, noise treatment refers to specific tire tread designs created by tire companies that incorporate differently sized tread blocks, meaning sections of tire. The different sizes of tread blocks will create a variety of pitches, which will reduce noise. If a tire's tread blocks were all the same size, they would all produce the same pitch, creating a lot of noise. This image shows you how sections of tread or tread blocks come in different sizes, small, medium, and large, which are also called pitch lengths. As you can
So as they were looking at those tire markings, and if that was actually the tire markings for his vehicle, it would be able to tell the pitch of the tire, and you compare that to the pitch of the car you hear in the camera, and you also compare the tire of the Elantra, what it comes with factory, or you look up and you try to figure out if they've had aftermarket tires placed on the vehicle. I mean, it's a very tedious process. So that's why when people are talking in these panels and on these chats and they're talking about there's no evidence and this and that and the other, it kind of annoys me because they're just, and they're calling the police stupid and they're calling them incompetent and they don't have any real direction on how to um do an investigation. I'm showing you there's different ways to get caught.
see here, noise treatment designs can be complex, involving various combinations of differently sized tire tread blocks. The pattern of noise treatment can be really helpful for finding characteristics to help match a tire tread impression from an accident or crime scene with a tire from a suspect vehicle. The image here represents a whole tire tread, and you can definitely see the complex arrangement of tread block sizes, numbering 1 through 4, which can be really helpful in matching tread patterns. When analyzing tire treads, you want to make sure you look for tread wear indicators. These indicators, called wear bars, are raised rubber bars that wear down as a tire is used. Wear bars can sometimes be seen in tire tread impressions, and when you identify the wear bar along with a noise treatment, this information can allow a forensic investigator to pinpoint the exact section of tire tread that made the impression. This can be really helpful when trying to match accident or crime scene impressions with suspect treads. Now, let's move on to tire track evidence. If you remember, tire track evidence involves the patterns made by 2 or more tires so that you can look at dimensional characteristics, among other things. Some of the most important things you can analyze with tire tracks are measurements such as tire track width or stance, wheelbase dimensions, turning diameter, and the relative positions of tracks when a vehicle turns. Track width or stance is the measurement made from the center of one wheel to the center of the opposite wheel. One thing you have to keep in mind with this measurement is that front track width and rear track width will usually be different. In a front-wheel drive car, the front wheels provide inaccurate measurements when they turn, so you'll want to rely on the rear track width, meaning the rear wheel dimensions. Another important measurement to take from tire tracks when available is the wheelbase. This measurement is taken from the center of the hubs from the front wheels to the center of the hubs of the rear wheels. Unfortunately, all of the points needed to make this measurement are rarely available at an accident or crime scene. The times when this might be available are when the car is parked in snow or rain, where you could clearly see where the bottoms of all 4 tires were. If you have a circular tire track pattern, you can
And you don't know, as well as I don't know, what the weather was like by the time he left that morning. I know it said it was 32, overcast, and cold, cloudy. So was there moisture on the ground already at 4:28? With that moisture throughout the day, throughout the morning, did it heat up? Did the moisture stay on the ground? The only bad part of all that is when other vehicles came to investigate. You know what I mean? Like there was a white truck that was parked by a dumpster. There was the other cop's car that, rolled up in there. there was a lot of stuff going on that could have impaired the tire portion of it. Let's hope not.
Determine the vehicle's turning diameter. This is the diameter of the circle that the vehicle makes when the steering wheel is fully turned. The turning diameter can be calculated using the equation b squared divided by a plus a, where b is the distance between 2 points on the turn circle, and a is the distance between the outer margin of the circle and a midpoint between those 2 points on the circle. The last important thing to document from tire track evidence is tire positions. Tire positions can only be documented for turning vehicles because that's when you'll see all 4 tire tracks. When a vehicle moves in a straight path, only the rear tire tracks are available. When a vehicle turns, the rear and front tires track separately. Here is another image of tire positions from a turning vehicle. You can clearly see that all 4 tire tracks are visible when a vehicle is turning. It's really important to document this and understand how tire tracks are made and which tires are being represented by specific tire tracks. All of this information is critical.
And that's interesting because he did make a left turn supposedly off of Queen Road. Or King Road, I'm sorry. So he would have been turning left. So if he was going at a high rate of speed, there would have been all 4 tires documented if they did indeed wear off onto the asphalt.
In order to interpret the sequence of events at an accident or crime scene, and also to help match evidence to suspect vehicles.
Let me take a quick evaluation from the chat. How am I doing, guys? Are you learning some things here? Are you getting some knowledge? Because that's why I'm doing it, is to give you guys some knowledge rather than having you to continue to listen to people that don't really understand, as these professionals do, how to explain the evidence and how they developed the evidence, because to say there is no evidence, not to say that there was no tire marks, there was no footprint, there was nothing. As many people have said, the PCA is trash. It's not real. It's just something somebody made up. Man, that's going to extreme in my book. If you hold on to that belief system, it's one thing to have it, but it's another to push that out into the world, that you believe so much hatred. Yes, this will be used in the trial. They will show, if this is how they match his vehicle to the sound that they heard, or even if there's any soil in the tires that that was left. I mean, there's a lot of forensic that goes on, but you can't get into the CSI effect where you think that, it's just like the TV show, it's going to be solved in an hour. It's really not. I mean, there's always a long process, and that's why it's taken so long. The video on the court process was one of my favorite videos ever. Great. Yeah, I mean, I try to give you guys the real deal, instead of the things that, it's one thing for me to get on here and talk for 2 hours about my thoughts or my feelings about what they have or what they might not have. But if you don't know, Why are you going to get on there and present it as fact? Especially when you start off the video by saying these are my opinions, but then you present the video with such intensity that people believe that what you're saying is factual. You know, you're tainting the perception of potential jurors. You're tainting people's view on this individual. So whenever these creators want you to say, well, you know, these guilters or whatever, they're tainting the jury pool. You know, you have to remember, since we're all giving information, who's really giving it in an appropriate way based on the way that it happens versus somebody's opinion on how it happens. Because we have a lot of people that don't go to school to learn things, and they learn their training through YouTube videos, or they learn them through, you know, not even a scientific way. And I'm not knocking, I mean, I'm playing YouTube videos, but these are coming from professionals. These aren't coming from somebody in their yard doing an experiment trying to teach me how to identify a tire track. You know. So it's different when it comes from a professional. When a professional shows you their expertise and they show you how these things are done, it gives you a different insight. It takes your bias away. And I remember one time my friend Carla was talking about the more educated you become on something, the bias leaves you and you're left with the educational part rather than your bias.
In this video, we're going to be casting the footwear impression. Always remember that you must photograph your footwear impressions before you cast them. And since that's been done, we're going to go ahead and show you how to cast. Now, depending upon what kind of ground your footwear impression is in, will depend on how you treat the area. So we have some kind of loose, fine dirt here, and we don't want to damage the impression when we pour the casting material on. So we're going to use a hardening spray to kind of set this print. And when you're using this hardening spray, you don't want to spray too close at first because you want to see how it's going to affect with the wind and your surroundings and everything.
Oh, damn. I was wondering where that White Rain hairspray was being used these days. Or is that Aquanet? That's what's making the shoe print hard?
So you just want to, we've got an angle here.
Just kidding on that.
Okay. And now, whatever casting material you're using, they usually come pre-measured in a bag. And so we're going to go ahead and mix up, add the water. Make sure you follow the directions on whatever casting material you have.
You know, people were watching this live. They'd be like, oh my God, she's not gloved up. She's not had booties on. She's not in a white suit and she's not wearing an oxygen mask. You know, she's contaminating evidence. Get a grip. Get a grip. She's casting a shoe print. She's not gathering DNA or blood or any of that. You know? You thought I was serious? That's funny. The assumption is they are able to test tire composition and match a specific tire or regional manufacturer. Yes, exactly. They're going to be able to tell where those tires came from, and they're going to be able to trace it from the manufacturer all the way to the car. Even if he got rid of those tires, they're still going to be able to go all the way to the car. So let's continue on. I just wanted to pause and say that because so many times when these investigators, and this is a scientist, you know, when they're doing their investigations or they're preparing, people are so focused. Like right here, if this was a photo, they'd be like, "Oh my God, look how close she is to that impression. She didn't put the cap back on the water, so that water's contaminated now. There's no way that powder in that bag is any good. She contaminated the whole crime scene. They're just trying to set somebody up right here. I just know it." Her shadow contaminated it. You see it?
If it comes in a bag like this pre-measured, you can just go ahead and mix it in the bag. Make sure you get it all the way down into the corners because you're going to want to use all of this casting material.
You see it, right?
All right, now that this is fairly well mixed, very well mixed, you may want to make sure there's no lumps in here whatsoever. You can go ahead and remove our scale. Don't want it to be in the way. Now, when you pour out your casting material, you never want to pour directly onto your footwear impression. You want to start at one end, and as the material builds, it will flow, and you can direct the flow by continuing to pour on top of the casting material that's already come out.
See, I have this in full screen, and I still can't see what she's about to pour on. I mean, that is how good these people are. Like, either they created this and they know exactly where it's at, which I'm sure they did. But still, I mean, even if I knew where the footprint was, unless I did it, that tells you the expertise of the individuals.
And you're going to want to give yourself a little bit of an overlap here on the outside of maybe 1 to 2 inches surrounding this print. You don't need to open this all the way either. Just start your pour. See how you can kind of guide it to flow without actually pouring
Okay, I see it now.
directly on this print.
The big print. I see it now. Pancake batter, huh, Jeff?
And don't be shy, use all of your compound here. Now, we have a tongue depressor that we can use to just lightly smooth and spread this. You can get kind of an even application. Make sure you've covered enough area. And then you're going to let it set for about 30 minutes. You want to make sure that it's, really set before you try to lift it up. And then you're going to, once you've lifted it after those 30. Okay, about a half an hour has transpired. So now we're going to go ahead and lift up our casting. And it's covered with dirt, as it should be. You don't want to go ahead and brush this off yet. So now what you would do is you would place this in a cardboard box and transport it back to your lab, where you would then let it set for about another 72 hours so it can cure and harden all the way. And then after 72 hours, you can go ahead and brush it off, wash it off, so you can look at all the detail. That way you don't compromise any of the detail of your cast. If you were to wash it off now, it might be a little too soon. Now we're rinsing off our cast. Take a little bit. Gradually work through all this dirt. into some further detail, you could probably use a little brush along with the water to get the rest of this dirt off. But you can already see a good amount of detail here, the tread mark of this footwear impression. For further information on footwear impression photography and casting, please visit our website at the Crime Scene Investigator Network. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a pretty good job, don't you think? What do y'all think, guys? What do y'all think? I believe that was a great job right there. Let me go ahead and pull up the next video. Like I said, I have plenty of short videos, and I hope that they're not boring you. We got probably about 3 more. This next one's going to be about photography. So this guy's going to show you how to set up the photography when they're shooting with evidence, and he's going to show you how to do the tripod and how to do the lighting and all that. So it's this one's kind of dry, but Jeff might enjoy it since he's into the photography and things like that. So here we go.
Lab today. And what we're going to concentrate on is photographing footwear impressions. And these are going to be the category 2 images. We're in the lab because it's a controlled environment, and we're going to demonstrate the procedure for you. Just remember that if we had actual footwear impressions on, say, the outside of a building, we would be documenting where these are located. We would be also documenting direction of travel. But what we're doing in the lab is we're going to look at the technical aspects of how to set the camera up, how to set the tripod, how to use the flash, so that these things are properly documented so that an expert could come and analyze our photographs, compare those with other 2-dimensional impressions, and then.
You're right, Stevie. You're right. I mean, shoe prints, boot prints, impressions made in the sand, dirt, concrete, whatever it might be, are sometimes more telling than fingerprints. So we don't know how many casting they did in that area. Nobody does. But out of all that, 113 pieces of physical evidence, or 18, whichever one, and that's without the lab stuff. So that's quite, that's quite a bit. That's more than was in the PCA. So people say everything that's in the PCA is everything they have. That doesn't sound like it to me.
Possibly make a match on a suspect if they were wearing the same footwear. So that's what we're going to go through, and I'm going to walk you through. The first thing I'm going to do is we'll take a look at the camera settings, and we'll show you how to set this up to make sure that we get the best image. If we go to our menu settings on the camera, and we bring that up, there is an image quality. We're going to start with image quality. And instead of using a JPEG image where we have a compression issue, we're going to set this on a RAW, and on for example, on a Nikon camera, that's the NEF file. But on a Fuji camera, it's going to be called something different, and then also on a Canon. But this is all raw, and just consider it raw, uncompressed information. And that's important. That's very important for that scientific analysis. So we're going to set the image on RAW. And I personally, if the option is on the camera, what I'll do, I'll shoot it also as a RAW file and also as a fine JPEG, because that's going to give us basically 2 different files that anybody can look at a JPEG file. So if I needed a latent print examiner or a footwear examiner to look at this file, they could also access it and see it in a JPEG if they didn't have the ability to open up this RAW file, which is proprietary to Nikon, for example. So that's why we do it in both formats. The other thing we want to set on the camera is going to be the image size. And the image size, we're going to shoot at the largest format that we can. So we're going to check that. Once we've done that, we're going to check our white.
See, at the end of this, I was still lost. Jeff is probably going to be the only one that really understands any of this, but it's interesting nonetheless, you know?
Balance. Our white balance is to ensure that we have the correct color rendition. This impression happens to be left in kind of a yellowish colored sand, so I want that sand to appear in the image as exactly as the way that sand appears. I don't want it to have a whitish cast or more of a bluish cast, so I've got to match that up. That's important. And the other thing that we set on the camera is going to be the ISO sensitivity, and that is setting our sensor to for the sensitivity of the light. So we're going to set for 200 on that. That's a good speed to use, a good ISO setting for us to use. Now, if you've noticed, I've done all of these adjustments, the adjustments so far with the camera in my hand. I'm not going to place the camera on the tripod over the impression and then start making these adjustments, because the potential to drop the camera, drop something into that impression is always there, and that would ruin the impression. So that's why everything's being done in my hand right now. A few other things we're going to do to just go ahead and get the settings out of the way. I'm going to set the aperture setting on the camera to the smallest opening size, and that consequently is the largest f-stop number. And on this lens, it happens to be f29. If the number went up to 36, I would set it all the way up to 36. But I'm going to do that so that I maximize my depth of field. Think of depth of field as getting everything into focus that is at different planes from the camera. In other words, if the part of the impression is a ½ an inch deep and another part is an inch deep, then those are two different planes. So it's important that we stop that opening down. We call it stopping down. We get that opening small so that all of that comes into focus. And that we do that, and that takes care of that on the camera.
I can't claim I know what he's talking about. I'm just stopping it so I don't get copyrighted and then continue on.
Camera. Once I've adjusted that, I'm just going to adjust the shutter speed so that I get a correct exposure, so that I get just a good exposure for the image. So we'll take care of that. The other thing I like to do, some people use what we call a cable release, but what I like to do is use the self timer, and it delays the opening of the shutter for, if you set it for 5 or 10 seconds, it's going to delay that reaction, and it keeps my hands off of the camera, because if you touch a camera, there's no doubt that you're going to have a vibration. So we want to use the self timer or a cable release when we're doing this. Once we start working our way around with a flash unit, that's very helpful to us, because it basically makes us hands free. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the camera. We set the self timer. I'm going to attach the camera now to the tripod, and we're going to adjust the meter, and the meters to get the proper exposure. I'm also going to set the focal length. Before I even do that, I am going to just had another thought that I almost forgot to tell you about, is I'm going to set the focal length on the camera. The focal length is controlled by the lens, and I'm going to set this right at about 35 millimeters. And on this particular camera, without going into all the technical aspects of this comes up to the equivalent of around 50 millimeters. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get what is the normal perspective with this camera, and that's very important. It also helps keep, if I accidentally used 18 millimeters, which is what we call a shorter than normal view, I'll have a curvature to my scale. So I'm introducing distortion, and I don't want that to happen. So I know there are a lot of things to consider here, but we're just kind of going through them one at a time. So remember, we're going to set that lens on this camera at about 35 millimeters. And and this will give us what we need. So I'm going to take this. I've got my exposure meter set on manual, and then I'm going to attach the camera. Now, I'm not over the impression. I'm not over that impression. So as I attach it and get everything tightened up good, there's no chance of anything falling and into that impression. You'll notice this tripod that I'm using, this tripod has a center post that can be turned upside down, and we call it inverting the tripod, the center post. This is very important. It also has legs that will expand. Instead of being locked into a very upright position, it will let these legs expand. And what this gives me is a lot of space to work around this impression and then bring light in from different angles without having the interference of the tripod legs. So this is a good piece of equipment for us. I'm going to get the camera. Now I'm positioning the camera over. And the other thing to note is the camera.
See, I was naive. I thought that they just leaned over the impression and took a picture leaning over. I didn't have a clue that they used the tripod and how they set up the camera and the lighting and all this. I had no clue.
Is positioned in the proper orientation for the footwear impression. The impression is running this way. We got the heel here and the toe here. And so I've got the camera positioned in this sideways orientation so that I'm able to fill the frame as much as possible with that vital information, and not, if I turned it this way, if I turned it the opposite direction like this, then I would have to raise the camera up twice as high to get that, that image, and that is affecting our resolution. And what we're doing is we're not maximizing the use of our camera in that case. So I'm trying to turn it, I'm going to turn it this way. And what I'm going to do now is look through the viewfinder, and I'm going to, I've already set my focal length. So if I do any change, I'm not going to change my focal length. I'll adjust my focus, and I'm going to use this in the manual. I'm going to use the
Like you said, my luck, I'd be leaning in to set the focal length, and I didn't secure it well enough. It'd fall right in the cast. I'd be so mad. But that's how my life goes, especially yesterday. Yesterday was a bad day.
this in the manual focus because I'm going to shoot multiple images of this impression, and I don't want the focus to shift in and out. So I'm going to leave that, set it manual. And there's another reason for doing that, and we'll get to that in just a minute as I continue this demonstration. But I'll get this in focus, and I've got the camera back now. The back is parallel to that impression, and I can tell that because I've got equal focus in 4 different points on this impression. I've got focus, good focus here and here and here and here. So I know that on the axis of the camera, I've got this properly oriented, okay? I'm going to take an exposure reading, and I'm just going to take a picture with the lighting condition that exists right now. So we should have a delayed response, and the self timer is counting down right now. And we just took a picture of this impression. And I'm going to look at the viewfinder, look at the LCD screen, review that, see if I need to make any adjustments. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply move this in just a little bit because I can fill the frame a little bit better. I'm not going to change my focal length by zooming because I don't want to change my perception. And once I've done that, I've got everything set now. Now what I did was,
So here's a question for you guys. You know, we were talking about how people view contamination and corruption and setting people up and all this. Look at all the work it takes to get these images and cast in the dirt, and all this time and energy that it takes to do this stuff. I'm asking you, with all this time and energy and expertise, who would possibly benefit from setting one person up? Who? And how would everybody else follow that one person? And you say money. But you know, money doesn't outweigh the consequence. The consequence is always going to be greater in this aspect that you're talking about. I believe that the other side, they want to cast doubt because honestly, they can't figure it out. Or they have a conclusion that is so wild that everybody else's earthly confusion or conclusion is trash or garbage.
with that first shot, and we normally we would shoot 2 or 3 shots of that same thing. That is showing the print as we found it, the lighting conditions and so forth. Now what I'm getting ready to do, and this is the really important part, is we're going to begin to side light this impression, and we're also going to scale it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a scale. Remember, one of the important things about crime scene documentation is we have to photograph anything that we find prior to adding any scales or markers or anything like that. So this is just one of those basic tenets that we do. I'm going to go back down here, and now I'm going to add the scale. And when I add the scale, I'm going to position it so that the scale is right in alignment with this footwear impression, okay? And once I've gotten that positioned, this is very close to the same level of the impression. So I'm going to leave the scale like that because I don't want to risk pushing any of the dirt into, or any of the sand into the impression. So this is how I'm going to frame this up. And what I'm going to do is make sure that I get the scale. All I've done is shift the camera just a little bit, but I haven't changed the focus. I haven't changed the focal length. And now I've got the scale to where it's perfectly aligned in the edges of the viewfinder. Once I've done that, I'm going to change another thing on the exposure because I'm going to start using a flash, and I'm going to put my shutter speed on the maximum synchronization speed for this flash. And that's going to be 200th of a second. So what the flash is going to help us do is going to minimize any movement. It's going to give us a control type of light, and it's also going to give us a consistent lighting. So when I bring this flash in from different directions, we're going to have the exact same color. We're going to have great depth of field. It's going to be motion free, and it's going to give that analyst a lot of good information to look at. With the self timer set, once I release.
Aren't you impressed with how much this guy knows? Like, I'm impressed with everything that he's taught so far today. You know, I'm impressed.
This, then I'll be able to stand back, get up just a little bit, and then I'm going to bring this light in from an angle, and I'm going to position this at about 3 feet away. And then we get that, the flash goes off, and that gives me a nice oblique side lighting from this direction. So I've fired the flash between the opening of the tripod legs, not through the openings, because if I go through the openings, then I would end up with a shadow going right through there. Another thing I can do, I can change my angle a little bit. The deeper the impression, then the higher you raise the flash. You bring it up a little bit, you elevate it. Okay, we don't want to position a flash right on top of the impression like this, because if we did that, the light will create a hot spot more in the middle. So we want to have this back at about 3 feet. That's the position we would use. Now, another thing that we also do, we've got a light that is simulating sunlight, and it's coming in. And what we do when we're outside doing this is we'll take something as simple as one of these sunshades that you can buy for your car that you get at Walmart. And in order to control the light, we'll use this and we'll block the light. So if there was sunlight coming in like this, I would block it with this, and I would also cause my flash to go off. And sometimes you need an assistant. If you got somebody and you can't quite stretch it out, you can get someone else to help you. But I'm able to shade that impression and then have the flash go off. Okay, we've done it from that side. And then what I'll end up doing is I'm going to work my way around this impression, and I'm going to bring that flash in from the different sides, because we're casting what we call, we're casting shadows on one side, and we're casting or creating highlights on the other. So the examiner, if it either you or whoever's going to do this examination, this gives them a great opportunity to see a lot of different information. And once we've captured that, once we've done that and we shot this overall view of this impression, the last thing that we do to also increase our resolution is we leave everything exactly the way it is, but then we actually take the camera and we're going to lower it down like this, and I'm going to photograph what you can consider the toe portion, and then I'm going to separately photograph the heel portion. And that's going to be, I'm going to create an overlap so that I know exactly where that portion is. But I would come in.
I mean, I didn't even realize photography had so much to do. I mean, I know with lighting and things like that, but as far as the dimensions of the light, how it bounces off, I mean, you have to be pretty scientific in understanding the variables of light and reflections. Oh, I said reflections. Oh, shit.
And I'm going to move, once I get my focus, all I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this tripod and I'm going to photograph that heel, the toe portion. And you say, well, you're doing that on a floor that's nice and smooth. That would be more difficult to do outside if you were actually in a field or something like that. But the key part, once you've focused and you have your focal length set, you don't change that, because I can slide the camera, even if the ground is uneven, I can slide the camera over and have that portion in focus. Once I slide it back toward the heel portion, because I maintain the same thing, the focus, focal length, I may have to reposition the camera a little bit, but I've got the exact same registration. So that's an important thing to remember. So once we do this, we would do the same thing. We would take and we would shade the light and wait for the flash to go off, and we photograph that toe portion, and then we'll move the camera. And if anything has changed, for example.
So that's interesting too. He moved the camera. He didn't move the cast in the little bucket there. He didn't move that. He moved the camera. So that way it didn't mess with any of the cast. That's awesome.
For example, if the floor, something was a little bit uneven, or the ground was a little bit uneven, if I had to raise this up just a little bit, which I do, because I probably shifted the tripod legs just a little. And now I'm back in focus. So I know I've got the exact same image size. So now I'm ready to do that toe portion. Oh, excuse me, I've done the toe portion. So now I'm doing the heel portion. One of the best modes to use on a flash, when you look at it, is it's called TTL or TTL-BL. This stands for through the lens. It stands for balanced field flash. So this is integrated with the camera, and they work together to determine a really good exposure for the footwear impression. But this is how we go through and document our footwear impressions. And once we've done that, the next step, we feel that we've got really good images of this, then the next step is to cast this impression. And we're going to do that in our next section.
Thank you so much. I told you that was kind of different than what I've been showing you. It was kind of long-winded, but it's interesting nonetheless, especially if that's, if you're into things like that. There's a couple more videos and then we'll be done. So this guy's gonna cast. He's gonna show you another way to cast. Happy Friday the 13th. So here we go.
We're at the National Forensic Academy. Earlier, we discussed the proper steps to capture a shoe wear impression photographically. The next step in capturing a shoe wear impression is to cast the impression. There are numerous types of materials that are available for casting impressions. One of the primary used is dental stone. It's a product that dentists use to cast impressions of teeth. There are also a number of other manufacturers that manufacture similar products specifically for forensic uses. The next thing that we will need is a fence. A fence can either be a commercially bought one or one that you make yourself. Its limited purpose is to contain the material once we pour it into the cast. The next item that we'll need will be some type of paint stick, wooden spoon, or something of the like. What we will use this for is when we pour our casting material into the cast, we will hold this just above the cast. So as the material goes down, this slows the velocity of the material, keeping it from damaging the substrate and the impression, thereby losing information. This will help us prevent that. And lastly, it's always good to have some type of container that you can transport water in. It's not always readily available depending upon the location you're at. These are best to fill up before you go somewhere that you think that you're going to need the water. The last thing that we need to make sure that we have is some way of marking the cast. There are numerous ways to do that. One is to write directly on the cast. Once it begins to set, you can write right on it with a permanent marker, or while the cast is still wet, you can bend the corner of an index card, stick that down into the wet material, and then it gives you a really nice surface to write on. The first thing that we need to do is put our fence into place. When we put our fence into place, what we do not want to do is shove the fence into the material. If I shove this fence down into the material, I take the chance of disturbing the impression by causing cracks and other things in it. So what I want to do is,
So I guess this would be like, when you find a print, but you don't want to actually do it outside, because that other lady didn't put a fence around hers. So I guess this would be like something that you wanted to preserve, whether it be in, I don't know, sand, kind of like that. I guess you could dig around and just lift the whole thing and put it in a container. I don't know. But that other lady didn't use a fence, so I don't know what the difference is.
I want to cement my fence gently on top of where we're going to make our impression. Rather than pushing it down in to make sure there's a good seal to contain the material, it's a much better idea to have sand or whatever your substrate is available so that we can build up the edges around the impression rather than take the chance on damaging the impression. Once we have our fence in place, the next stage is to begin mixing our material. Most people that do this type of work will contain their material in some type of a plastic bag, Ziploc bags. I also recommend that you double bag in order to keep this from leaking in your vehicle, as it makes a very large mess when it does. When we mix this, we want to make sure that we are prepared, everything is set, because this contains a material that causes an exothermic reaction. And what that means is this will begin to heat itself and set itself very quickly. So be prepared to pour this when you start mixing. Have everything else set and ready to go. When we mix it, we want to mix this to the consistency of a thin pancake batter.
Jeffrey.
As you're kneading this, it is important to make sure you leave the top of the bag open, because if you do not, you can run the risk of causing pressure through the kneading process and rupturing the bag.
Hello, pancakes. Yeah, you were right.
The next step is to pour. If you have someone hold the stick over top of the impression, it will lower the velocity of the material as it goes into the impression. Pour slowly and move the stick over as you pour. Try to get an initial layer down first to fill in the impression, to protect it with the stick. And then you can go back with any remaining material. Continue to pour and fill in. Any of this extra material that you pour in to fill in will actually reinforce and strengthen your cast. So use whatever you have. If you've poured the bottom layer relatively thin, it's always a good idea to possibly mix a second bag to reinforce it and go ahead and dump that in on top of this so that it will be structurally sound. Once you have all the material dumped into the cast, you have to wait approximately 15 to 20 minutes under normal conditions for this to harden. When it's cooler,
So like you said, it heats up rather quickly, so that helps it harden. You know, all this stuff is very interesting to me because it's like getting an understanding, you know, because otherwise you're just at somebody else's mercy to explain this stuff to you rather than learning it yourself. Y'all welcome the man of the hour. Jeff Hayes.
Jeff H. Hey, 12 gauge.
Hey,
This is
Jeff.
good stuff you found with the. I like these videos. This is cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna continue to play this one and then we'll keep going. I want you to explain the camera one a little bit more, if you would.
Sure. I can try.
it will harden a little bit slower, and when it's warmer, it will harden a little bit faster. Once you have it all in, it all looks good, then you can smooth out and tap down the impression just a little bit. If you make sure that it's all consistent, you can also smooth out a spot on the top in which you can write the information that we'll put on there before we lift the cast. The other thing that you could do at this juncture, this would be the time while the top is still not completely set. This would be the time to put your index card into the material. Just bend the end of the index card, stick it into the material, and let it set there. Once your cast is fully set, you can feel it feels almost like a ceramic surface then. You can remove your fence. This is particularly important when you have a cast that has filled the entire fence. It's much easier to remove the fence before you lift the cast. When you lift the cast, it's best to lift it a little bit from all the edges, loosen it.
I don't know about you, but I'm getting anxiety just watching him lift that because I'm thinking to myself, if I was lifting that, I'd be so paranoid that I'd break it in half. I'd have to start all over. You know, something like that. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, you don't
Jeff?
want to mess up that evidence. I mean,
Yeah.
that's critical evidence. Even if you mess it up a little, I mean, the defense attorney be like, well, this guy messed it up a little. That means we might as well throw the whole thing out. You know.
Yeah. Here we
And
go.
then pull it up all at once. As we discussed earlier in the Knowles portion, we do not want to remove this material from the bottom. That can be very important to the examiner. This needs to be transported to some secure facility and dried. When we made this cast, we added a lot of water to it. If we immediately package it into a box, that water will come out as it dries and break down the integrity of that box, thereby potentially harming the integrity of your evidence or having it fall out of the package. So it's best to let this dry first, then package it appropriately in a paper box and zip tie it down to keep it from moving. Now, like we said, we do not want to clean these casts, but in the end, this is one that we did earlier. This is the quality of the cast that you will end up with. This is ultimately what the examiner will see when they do their comparison.
That looks like a cookie, bro.
It was Bigfoot.
It looks like a sugar cookie. Welcome, Jeff. How was your evening, buddy?
We must be hungry. We're talking pancakes and cookies, sugar cookies.
Got that blue shirt on. Were you at practice?
No, this is gray actually.
Oh, gray? Okay.
Yeah.
So give us an overlay about the photography one, because I mean I thought it was interesting, but I didn't really understand much of it. Did you?
Yeah, you know, it sounded like he really knows what he's talking about. I mean, I agreed with everything he was saying, and he it sounds like he's trying to to do everything with consistency and accuracy. And I like how he was talking about blocking out the sun. I mean, if you don't block out the sun and then you add a flash, now you've got the sun shadow and your flash shadow, and it's just natural. We're all used to understanding and being able to examine things that have a shadow. In life, generally, there's just one shadow. There's only one sun. If we had two suns in the sky, it'd be different. For those aliens that live on planets with two suns, they got two shadows.
Right.
So. But it sounds like he was consistent with like his focus. He wasn't going to allow his focus to ever change, because that's one thing. Like when I was photographing those rifles, that was I shoot on manual focus too, because you don't want the focus changing. Even I was finding, even with shooting those rifles up real close, I didn't even feel like I could trust the autofocus, because sometimes it would get it, sometimes it wouldn't. So I stuck to manual focus, completely.
So did you use one of those? It looked like a hand flash that he had. Like you would click the flash with the.
Yeah,
my
yeah. The only flashes that I own they're Nikon flashes. I thought they were nearby, but they're way over there. They just fit on top of the camera. But what I do is I take them off the camera and attach this magnet to the front of it, which puts the small flash into a big soft box with a big soft, it's got a soft fabric diffusion white on the front of it.
Okay.
So I'm using a cheap flash, but then with all that contraption added, it turns it into like a very professional, more like an expensive flash you might see. You get the same results as an expensive flash, you just don't have to pay as much. That's made by Magmod. If they are watching and they're saying, "Hey, Jeff buys a lot of our flashes and he's talking about us. Maybe we'll send him a free light or something."
There you go. You know what I thought was interesting is how he said, you could buy a cheap visor from Walmart or whatever to just block off the natural lighting, so that you don't get that natural lighting to overcast the flash that you're trying, or the photo that you're trying to get. I guess the flash kind of brings up the impression with the lighting that it projects upon it. Would that be kind of right?
Well, think of the flash as like having access to the sun in the sky, but for just a quick moment, because it's that bright. And
Okay.
so that's the idea, is that you want a blast of sun that you've got control over, and you don't want a second sun introducing that. It's really all about the shadows, and about you set the angle. If you set the angle of the flash way off to the side, then you got shadows going way off to the other direction. If you put the flash
maybe-
right above
Maybe
you,
if you have some time, Jeff, like if you're wanting to do a project one day, maybe you could do a demonstration for us, like make that in one of the videos and put it on your page, like put
yeah, I should do that.
a footprint, and then walk people through on how you got, just like this individual did. I think it would get people's curiosity, because a lot of people follow your page for the digital and video information.
Yeah. What did
Well-
Rondi had some good questions about figuring out the height and weight of the person. I missed the explanation of how they go about doing that.
Let me see if I can scroll up. I know that Stevie answered it. He said,
I thought Stevie might have said something like it was earlier in the video. And I
it
think I
said
may
you
have
can
missed
simply
that.
test the weight necessary to get a specific depth of impression for weight. Height is more difficult. So I would say that, kind of like that shoe print that I showed that day, that was evidence marker number 3. You understand what I'm talking about, that boot print?
Yeah.
So that one was deeper in the sand. So that would kind of implement in my mind that the person would have been a little heavier, or they walked heavier. if that makes sense.
Right.
know,
Right.
Because some people walk heavy. They might not be heavy in stature, but they stomp when they walk. You
Mm.
ever known people that walk like that? Like you could hear them walking
Yeah.
behind you, like, good Lord, or they shuffle. They shuffle their feet when they walk. They don't pick up their feet.
Right.
So I
Right.
would say that a lot of that has to do with the weight distribution from, the print. Like you can, like I have shown before, like this is the surface. If you're walking and you walk heel to toe, the heel is going to hit first, and then the impression is going to go like that.
Right.
But if you
So it
walk
might
a
be
little
deep
more,
on the heel.
yeah, like if you walk a little more flat footed or whatever, it's going to go like this
Yeah.
rather than heel to toe. It's going to go, more towards the front of the foot arcing.
Right. Right.
This next video has to do with evidence, and the reason that I chose to get this one out is because of the evidence locker that was talked about in the hearing, where she was asking, well, where do they keep the evidence, or where would I find that, or where would I go? Well, she was grilling Payne pretty good on that, right? We agree with that.
Yeah.
But this is going to explain why he didn't know as much as he knew. People just think that since you were the investigator that wrote the PCA, then you're involved with the investigating of everything that goes along with that. That was why there was 46 people on the case, or
Right.
50. There was a lot of people on this case. So as you can tell, there's a lot of people doing different types of investigation, taking photos, taking videos, taking measurements, as I've shown. There's a lot of things that go into an investigation, and it's kind of annoying when you hear people talking about an investigation. They act like you just walked in and what you see is what is evidence. You know what I mean? Like, well, you would have seen blood everywhere. You would have seen blood here. You wouldn't have seen blood there. Well, that's not necessarily true, because at the first video, he was showing how he used the blue light to be able to see things that you can't see with the naked eye. I don't know if you saw that one or not, but
Oh no. Yeah. I missed that part. Yeah.
yeah. Well, let me see what these guys have to say before we move on.
Ronnie's got a. Well, go ahead. You put that comment. That's good.
It is attempting to create conditions with no shadow at all. Okay.
Yeah. The thing about if you had no shadow at all, then you'd get no sense of depth. You'd get everything would just look flat. If it was shot directly from above a footprint and you had no shadows at all, it might actually look like there's no footprint at all. But yeah, so you'd want some shadow to give a sense of like the height of the impression, based on the angle.
I mean, it's hard. It's really hard to describe. It's easier to possibly show you, Rondi, than to try to articulate it in the words, because it's different for different variations of the stepping in the, like, stepping on sand is going to be a different impression than stepping on rock and gravel, stepping on a concrete surface, stepping on tile, stepping on wood. But in reality, they're going to try to lift the same type of impression with what they're using. Like when they're lifting footprints or boot prints or shoe prints off, like the Leighton shoe print, chances are they lifted that with tape. They did speak about using amino black. So that is something that they pour on the floor, and it lifts the print enough for you to see it. So you put a piece of tape or whatever, and you lift it off the floor, and then you place it on like a white object, a white background, so that you can see the footprint. So.
Rondi's points though about the accuracy of it. I mean, who's to say that the person wasn't carrying a 50-pound object when they stepped into that spot. You know, I mean, the reason it came to mind is like, I know when we go to the airport, a friend of mine, you know, you got to have your bag 50 pounds. So he weighs himself first on the scale, and then he lifts the bag, and then he does the math, subtracting his own weight. So, yeah, I mean, if you're carrying 50 pounds worth of something and you step down into it, then it does seem like the weight, the weight guess based on the depth would be off, you know, because you don't know what he's carrying. You don't care. He's carrying nothing. You know, he's carrying 50-pound weight.
It's kind of like, okay, if they found footprints, let's say he carried stuff into the house. Okay, let's try to go there in our minds. He carries a backpack or he carries something. Okay, so let's say as he's walking out or as he's going in, you're going to see footprints that are deeper because he's carrying more weight. So as he's walking out, let's say he's not having that on his body, but he has it on his arm. So the weight distribution is going to be different on the footprint because of the weight that is not directly in the back of him. That's what I'm saying. If that person walks heel to toe, that would explain why the back part of the heel would have been in there deeper if he was carrying something back out. A tote, you know, a trash bag. I mean, because he would have weighed more than supposedly 185 or however much the individual who did this, he would have been carrying more weight. So I hope that makes a little sense. I hope you understand that. Let's watch the evidence collection. And like I said, the reason that I chose this is because when people talk about the evidence stuff, they always want to say that they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what they were talking about. They were so incompetent. They acted like they don't know what their own department is doing. So let's watch this. This guy is very good.
Hi, my name is John Kinlarski. I'm the detective in charge of the evidence room. So I also hold the title of evidence custodian. I want to welcome you today to our evidence room. So I've been in law enforcement for 25 years. Some of the younger guys joke that they weren't even born when I first put on my uniform, but it's been a really nice career for me. I've been a detective for over a decade, and I've always had a hand in evidence, and it's been one of my passions. For those of you out there that like science and mathematics, you're going to enjoy this video. So behind more locked doors, we're now in the evidence processing room. What takes place here is that when officers collect evidence out in the field or detectives collect evidence, they're going to bring it back here. What happens is we have this workroom where we can properly package items, make them ready for long-term storage. We have different things that we can use to package evidence. Different types of evidence will require different things. So for example, some items may be placed in plastic. Some items that are DNA sensitive will be placed into paper. Whatever the state crime lab recommends for packaging, we can accomplish that here in this room. This here is our drug testing room. We have in here a hood, so that way when the officer is testing narcotics, they can actually put those items here underneath the hood and test them, and so that way there's a filter and it'll keep the air safe for them. Again, we have lots of gloves in here. We have disposable lab coats, so if the item that they're processing is messy, they can wear that. We also have respirators for them to wear. This is where we also keep our PPE. So those are those big white suits that when you do major crime scenes, they need to really limit the amount.
If you don't know what a PPE is, that is a personal protective equipment. Look, I got my glove right here. Just like them. I'm cool, huh?
You must have done it. You're the one that did it. He's got a glove.
of DNA spread, those will get put on. So this is our evidence response vehicle, who we affectionately refer to as ERV. ERV is our mobile crime processing unit. We can take that out to major crime scenes. So very similar to how I showed you inside our processing room, this here is a mobile unit that we can take out to those scenes where we're going to have a lot of evidence. We might have a lot of time on the scene. I carry most of the same equipment that's inside that room in this vehicle as well. So people have a lot of questions about what is evidence and what needs to be taken for evidence. Typically, evidence is those items that are important to help tell the story. One of our core values is integrity, and probably when we take a look at those core values, that's the one I really attach to the most. So it's very important that when people take a look at evidence, that they know that that evidence hasn't been manipulated or that it hasn't been changed in some way. So we try to make sure that it's properly preserved and then properly presented, so that way those people are seeing it just as the investigator had seen it. Quarterly, I go through audits by outside investigators who come in and ensure that my evidence is done properly, that it's properly packaged, and that it's...
See, I like how he said that. He said integrity is one of his core values, you know, and that makes a lot of, you know, trust when it comes to hearing somebody say that. You know, this guy is probably very good at his job, and he said he gets audited, you know, so there's plenty of people going back and looking at the evidence that you've gathered, have you packaged it, all this stuff. So to say that you go to a crime scene and you gather all this evidence, it ends up in the crime lab, and you say, well, from the house to the crime lab, while it's in the crime lab, people are manipulating the evidence, or planning evidence, or doing this and that and the other. You see how silly it sounds after watching these? And that's part of the reason that I chose to show these, because there's going to be more true crime, and those of you that are in this video, or not in the video, but in the live stream, will be able to differentiate between fiction and fact.
It's meeting the high quality standards that we've set up for that evidence. So I'm going to show you how we package evidence. I'm going to use this. I'm going to pretend that this here was a clue that I found at the scene. Now I want to ensure that it's packaged correctly. So in this case, I'm going to be packaging it in plastic. This is a heat sealer that we use. It creates a nice bond, so that way you can't peel apart the edges. They're good and firm, and it doesn't allow any introduction of any other contaminants to that evidence item. So what I'm going to do now is I place that item inside that bag, and now I'm just going to seal the other end. So I've got that item, and now I want to make sure that it's properly labeled. The best practice is to initial all of your seals. And then we're going to put our case number. I'm just going to make one up. And then I would usually apply some type of specific item number to that, the initial documentation purposes. When an officer gets done packaging their evidence, they're going to bring it downstairs. This is where the evidence room is located, but there's only 2 people that have access to this room. So the way that an officer submits their evidence is they come.
I don't know how they do it in Idaho, but did you hear what he said? There's only 2 people that have access to that area. So if it's the same in Idaho, that means that to say that why didn't Payne know about this evidence locker? Well, maybe he wasn't the one that had access to it.
Here to these lockers. They'll simply open the locker, place their item inside. The locker then closes, and they are unable to open it. So typically the next morning I will come in, I will take a look at the vouchers that have been submitted, and then I will go and find their evidence. So this is an example here of one of our lockers, and as you can see from there, there's the other side of the lockers where the officers have locked those doors. Here I verify that all the items in the locker match up to the voucher that was submitted, and then they will receive their own individual identification tag to also include bar tagging. So we're in the storage area right now, the evidence room. I want to show you just a couple of areas. This here is a commercial freezer. We use that for DNA evidence, also for blood test kits. Also any evidence that would need to be frozen, such as food items or anything that would have a potential to mold. In these safes right here, we keep valuable items such as currency, jewelry, anything with a high value amount to it will be stored in the safes. As we kind of look around here, you're seeing a lot of boxes and a lot of shelving units. In those shelving units, we contain all the cases that the officers have worked. And so in each of those boxes, they're each individually identified, and it allows me to go back in and find those cases pretty easily. In this room right here is our firearms room. So we keep handguns, shotguns, rifles. I also store in here evidence that's related to sexual assaults. So sexual assault kits are also stored in this room here. And as we continue to go forward, again, you're seeing a lot of shelving units for our general cases. We have one specific room also for drugs. So anything that's considered a controlled substance in the state of Wisconsin, we store in a special room that's kept safe for proper storage. It also has its own ventilation system, which
And that is awesome because when I go to the police station to pick up kids, man, you can get a contact high with all the weed that they have stored in their evidence. It's already in the ventilation. Like you walk in and that's all you smell is weed, and it's terrible. I mean, you just know that that's weed you're smelling.
is nice. That way any fumes don't come back here into the evidence room. I want to thank you today for watching our video, for seeing how we take evidence from start to finish, and a little bit more about our evidence room. We are excited to have people that like science and mathematics like myself. So for all my science and math nerds out there, keep up the good work, and any questions you may have, feel free to throw those our way.
He'd be a good reference to ask questions to. He seems approachable. He seems very knowledgeable. He seems like you could email him or ask him a question. I'm sure he would respond. You know what I mean? What do you think, Jeff?
Right.
What do you think about that video?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it was that was a great tour of the facility. I like that you notice they even had over the locker that had the two-sided door. The right above it was that big poster that said integrity. You know, they've even got that thing that was right behind him at the end. That's a Bible verse. You know, blessed are the peacemakers. You can see that there's an environment of like, you know, I mean, it makes me think of Spider-Man. It's like with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah,
They take it very seriously. Doesn't mean they're perfect because they're humans. We're all humans, but
Right.
it's like okay, this is what we're striving for here. It's we put it all over our walls, and you know, and I guess already in law enforcement, I mean, you already have methodology of doing things. I mean, because the basic, like, if you don't have basic methodology of like how you do stuff, you shoot yourself in the foot with a gun, you know, right? Because you've got even down to your weapon that you carry, you know.
I mean,
I don't
because
know.
honestly, Jeff, you know, I've been working with law enforcement either in one capacity or the other for, you know, about 20 years plus, 22 now. And they've always told us document as if you're going to court. And the last thing that you want to do is get to court, get subpoenaed, and look like a fool because you didn't do your job correctly. You didn't mark evidence correctly. You didn't investigate it correctly. You didn't write down specific words. You didn't, you know.
Right.
And the attorneys are going to do their job to discredit you. And that's a lot of what goes on in the court trial. And I agree with you, Rondi. We do need a field trip. You driving the bus? Hopefully it's a little yellow bus. And we got, you know, crayons and stuff to help us with the trip.
That would be good. That would be good. Hey, I want to remind everybody too, as I'm drinking this Coke Zero, this is not a camera. This is just a Coke.
Nice. and you don't have
Since we were on the subject of cameras,
a what was it that they said was a camera that he was holding up? A receipt?
Oh, the receipt. Yeah.
The receipt in the camera?
What did he have? He had a piece of the receipt paper was like about like this size.
Yeah.
Wasn't he holding it like? Wait, he's holding it this way, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
His fingers like, like to some it looks like a camera. To me, it looks like. Did you say number 33? That's me. That's me.
Right. See, I was watching him the whole time, especially after seeing the Grub Truck video for the first time. I was watching him and I thought, I'm not going to lie. I thought he was clicking that can and I was like, what the hell is he doing with that can? Why does he have it behind his back? Why does he keep clicking it? Is it a nervous habit? And then I kept watching him and I was like, he's a little old to be, there's no age limit to be at the Grub Truck. But I thought, he's a little older than most of these people. What is he doing there?
Right. I mean, it's like that sidewalk is only for people of a certain age, right? So what is he doing on a public sidewalk at a public place where you can order food?
Yeah.
But I know what you mean. I mean, but yeah. I was wondering if the reason, anybody was looking at that Coke can thinking suspicious. Is it possible he's a big guy, and so maybe I'm a big guy. Maybe I can relate to what he might have been going through. You ever order food and it's going to take? I think they said like sometimes the food to get your food took like 15 minutes, 20 minutes for them to get it ready, and you get that Coke right away, and you're like, oh, I could open it right now, but I know I'd drink it all, and then I'd be eating my food without my Coke. So I would hold this thing behind my back. I would like try and get my mind off of drinking it because I'm saving it so I can drink it when I eat. So
that makes sense. That makes total
and that's
sense.
exactly what he did. Actually, you never see him. Unfortunately, I was thinking, man, because it would help the conspiracy theorists if he would have taken a drink out of it. But he does open it near the end. He's eaten. Yeah. He's opened it near the end, but he never did drink it, and then he exited the frame. So, I'm thinking, man, if you'd have drank it, you would have like. But
was that from your stolen video that you got that information?
Right.
Hey, Stevie says like Maury not realizing he had the cast info the whole time is that was during the trial. He could have ruined the whole case. I believe he probably could have came back and redeemed himself. Because I was watching the Murdaugh stuff the other night, and it seemed like that gentleman had plenty of copies of the cast report, and he had a year's worth. So I don't know if Maury was put into building the whole case, during that whole time that they were looking for it, or if he was just collaborating the hours between the time that his phone went off to the time it went back on. If that is the case, then that makes sense that he wouldn't have a lot of information, I don't know.
Almost makes me wonder if they, this is just speculation, I could be completely off, but if they decided like, look, it's okay if we look foolish, that's Ann's job right now is to make us look foolish. If we look foolish and then we take it personally and then we start talking a lot and trying to explain and we go overboard, all that's going to be on record. So better to just, this isn't the trial yet. This is just a hearing. So the least you say, if you look foolish, you take one for the team, because then when the trial comes, then you show, same Maury shows up at trial, but this is trial. This is a many days worth of trial. He's probably going to bring all those big metal cases with him. He's going to have the filing cabinets worth of stuff. He will have access to the stuff that or they'll, you know what I'm saying? Because I don't think Brett Payne didn't walk in there with the whole lab behind him and all the evidence lockers so that he could answer Ann's questions. So for him to say, it's like saying, I don't know right now, but I can find out for you, which I think he answered the question that way a couple times.
Well, even in the Murdaugh investigation, I want to finish that probably tomorrow or the next day. But he even said did you present this to the court? When did you present it? And he said, today. So he presented that last part of it on the day that he was going to testify. So, I mean, to sit there and assume that everything has to be at that very moment, otherwise it's some kind of conspiracy, is very narrow-minded. Let's watch.
Yeah, I don't like
Go
I
ahead.
don't. I think when you go down that road where you convince yourself that these police are corrupt and it's all that, I really think you get thrown so far off the actual path that you can no longer see the possibilities and probabilities of what really happened, because you're so far off in the woods and you're convinced of this. Now maybe that they could say the same of us. They're my theories as well. So what I'm saying is I myself try to be careful of that. It's like, that's why I try to be open-minded to hear all theories, but there's this point where it's like, okay, the probability of that theory about the unicorn and they were stabbed by a unicorn horn, I'm gonna have to say that one goes into the category of not likely. But
Right.
thanks for playing.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and watch this last one, then we can kind of have open dialogue. Just the last video. So I hope that you've enjoyed the videos. They're very informative, I believe.
Actually, 12 gauge,
be
I'm gonna
here.
have to go in just a couple minutes to pick up my son. So
Okay, well
I
I'll
can stay a
probably
little
be
bit longer.
here. I'll probably be here if you want to come back and hop back up.
Okay,
for-
yeah, no, let's watch the video. I'll stay as long as I can.
In this video, we're going to talk specifically about securing and collecting evidence from a crime scene. So we've moved out of kind of what the role of an investigator is. We are moving out of what you can expect to have happen at a crime scene, and we're moving into specifically talk about securing and collecting evidence. What do you do with a piece of evidence? How do you properly secure the piece of evidence? How do you properly collect the piece of evidence? How do you document the evidence? And how do you proceed with the securing and collecting of the evidence piece? So the first thing you need to do when you get to a crime scene, in the case of an investigator, is that you need to obviously scan and look and make observations. But when you get to the point where you're actually securing and collecting evidence, you need to identify what pieces of evidence you have. And so there could be dry evidence, there could be liquid evidence, there could be wet evidence, there could be large or small evidence, there could be trace evidence, biological evidence. I mean, there's a variety of different pieces of evidence that you could or one could experience in a crime scene. And so I'm talking specifically about dry trace evidence first. Dry trace evidence is a piece of evidence that is dry. It doesn't have any moisture in it. It could be hairs. It could be fibers that aren't wet. And those pieces of dry evidence are packaged in a paper bindle and placed in a plastic bag, which is sealed with tape. If the evidence is moist at all or has any residual moisture, it needs to be air dried first in order to be stored correctly. If a piece of evidence goes into a sealed plastic bag wet, it likely will produce mold or fungus, which would be detrimental to the piece of evidence. It would obviously degrade the evidence.
You notice everything. You notice everything is documented with somebody's initials, dates, times, all this stuff. So collecting this evidence is very thorough with they call it God, my mind just went blank. Chain of custody. They call it the chain of custody. So here we go.
And so you'd want to dry it first. But if a piece of evidence is dry, then you can just go ahead and put it into your bindle and then obviously put it into a sealed plastic bag. But you want to make sure it's dry first. The way that the dry evidence is packaged is first you would put the piece of evidence in the middle of a sheet of paper. Okay? You would then fold along this line and bring this over. You would fold along this line, bring it over. You can kind of see here that you would essentially fold and bring it down, fold, bring it up. You can go left to right or up, down, and then you just continually fold in the flaps to the point where you get just a square that is completely contained, okay, within, or the piece of evidence is completely contained within. And then you would place that folded up piece of paper into a plastic bag. So you would slide that into a plastic bag. You would fold the plastic bag flap over. You would tape the flap down. You would then sign over the top of the tape. And that's really important because it ensures that the signature of the person is on the piece of evidence, which means that that is the person that, without a doubt, 100% packaged the piece of evidence. And if you sign over the top of the flap and you sign over the top of the tape, it makes it really difficult to undo the tape and then re-secure the tape so that the signature lines up, right?
So let me ask you guys a question in chat since we're talking about this. You see how the individual packaged this. So let's talk about the knife sheaths for a minute. If that detective who found that knife sheath was Payne, obviously, but that didn't mean that he was the one that collected the evidence. He wasn't the one that packaged it, dusted it, swabbed it. He wasn't the one that did all that. So, in my opinion, that would have been the lab job to do. As you saw in the evidence place, they do some of the testing at the lab. They had a mobile lab that morning. If you remember, it was that black trailer that was out in front of the King Road house. So I don't know if they were doing any testing in there. They could have been packaging evidence. But whoever packaged this evidence has to sign their name. And there's probably a lot more than just one name on these things. So people saying that it's contaminated or that somebody placed it there or somebody did this, that, and the other. Well, there's all these names on here. You can go by process of elimination of, charging these people with a crime if that was the case. So since none of these people are under arrest or in jail for contamination of evidence, it would be fair to say that it was gathered appropriately, bagged appropriately, and even probably processed appropriately. If I'm doing anything tonight, is I'm just dispelling all the stuff that is out there on these YouTube streets in one video. Do y'all agree or disagree? Because there's all this stuff that's said. People show videos of the court. They talk about the prosecutor. They talk about the defense attorney. They talk about the police department. But yet, the people who they put up on a pedestal, they don't understand that these people do the same thing that the other side does. I'm not talking bad about Cy Ray because I don't know Cy Ray. I've talked to him very briefly, but I don't know the man. But I can tell you this. If he used to work for the prosecution, he did the same thing that the other side is accusing Idaho State Police, the FBI, and Moscow Police Department of doing. But yet, since he's on the other side now, they're fully in belief of the man. So that should tell you a lot in itself. That should tell you a lot in itself. I listen to what people say. I'm not easily swayed, and I process information very fast. And I process inconsistencies. So when somebody is talking and they're trying to present something that is made to be look like it was something else than it is, I usually process it faster than the chat does, and I can see the inconsistencies. I can hear the inconsistencies because I do that for a living. So that's why I'm telling you, when these people are attacking this side of the information that's being presented, the evidence, as saying there's no evidence. They don't have anything. He's an innocent man. He should be walking by now. He should be let out free. You know, those are just your words. And why do you have a horse in the race? Why are you pulling so hard for the criminal? Because he had been suspected of a crime, so that makes him a criminal at this point. You don't have to be convicted to be a criminal. He is in jail. He has an inmate number. He has, court docket. He has all this stuff. So he is a criminal. Whether you want to put that on him or not, he's not a free man walking, just spending the night in a jail cell because he's been attacked or, what's the word? What do they call it? He's been profiled. He's been just snatched off the street. He was the one person they just snatched off the street. Said, we got the guy right here. And with everything I just said, is there a possibility that I could be wrong? Of course. I'm not speaking as I know everything or that I know all there is to know about this case, but I do know about this stuff that I'm presenting because I've been going to school for it for 2 years now. In the background, I've been learning all this stuff. So you can try to debunk me and be a fact checker and everything else that you do and know the little bit of information that you know, but that doesn't mean that you know everything there is about criminal investigations. Because I want to ask anybody who's listening to this or who may listen to this, when was the last time you investigated a crime scene? When was the last time you tagged and bagged evidence? When was the last time you fingerprinted anything? When was the last time you swabbed for blood, DNA, any of that stuff? When was the last time you worked in a lab to break down the DNA from the others and get one DNA profile? When was the last time that you were a court prosecutor? When was the last time that you did any of these things? So to sit there and speak as if those people that are talking facts about the criminal justice system are delusional or corrupt, that just shows all you need to show is that you have no idea. Otherwise, you would be working in that line of work, don't you think? And there's a reason why people hate police. I can tell you almost every creator that I've ever watched, if they're biased toward the police, I can tell you based on their stories where they get those biases from. Because it's written all over their face. They speak it with contempt and anger. Anybody that's associated with the law or of authority or has some kind of strictnness about their stance on the law, these individuals have a position in this for a reason. You can hear it in their voice. They shared their stories with some of their audiences. So you can pick it out. You understand why it's that way. So yeah, let me get off my high horse. This Coke, I guess, just kicked in, and Coca-Cola just kicked in, and I just started talking. Hold on a second. Let me just get back to the video, guys.
So it's a further piece of proof, safety, that allows individuals when they're working with a piece of evidence to know that it hasn't been tampered with. Okay. Another thing you would need to do is you would need to fill out an inventory label. We will do that in class. We'll practice with that. But inventory label basically talks about where the piece of evidence is located, what piece of evidence it is, who the suspect is, what the date is, what the case number is, that kind of thing, so that storing and analyzing the evidence is a lot more successful and productive. Okay. Liquid evidence obviously cannot be put into a paper bindle and stored in a plastic bag. And so if there is liquid evidence or arson remains or chemical remains or toxin remains, those are going to be stored in an airtight, shatterproof container. Larger pieces of evidence may be stored in a larger can, smaller pieces of evidence obviously in a smaller shatterproof container, but these dry evidence or even liquid evidence could also be stored in plastic bags if they're really, really big, or boxes if they're big. But for the most part, liquid evidence and arson remains are going to be stored in airtight containers, and that's really important because
But at the same time, as you heard that individual say, there's only two people that have access to that. So if you're one of those two people and the evidence is manipulated or corrupted, it's a process of elimination, they're going to catch who did it, right? Wouldn't you think? But good point, Jeff. Good point. And there's a lot of cameras, I think. And every tall guy I see him on camera with a brunette is obviously Ethan and Xana. Yeah, and the guys that are the guy or guys that were captured on the 1320 Linda Lane cam, they had a camera, or not a camera, but a flashlight on their head. You don't think that was a cell phone lighting up, or possibly? I mean, I would believe that it was a cell phone, because most people carry their cell phones in their left hand if they're right-handed. Who knows? But I don't think it was a lamp trying to distort the camera.
airtight is required in order to keep the contents from degrading, much like when you talk about the dry evidence and needing, or the wet evidence and needing to dry prior to putting in a plastic bag. We want to ensure that the contents of these containers are airtight so that they don't oxidize, they don't leak, they don't leach out into the environment, that kind of thing. So liquid evidence goes into an airtight sealed container, dry evidence goes into the paper bindle and then into a paper bag, okay, or a plastic bag. Chain of custody. Chain of custody is really important because there has to be a precise record of all individuals who have handled a piece of evidence after it's collected. That is really important because a lot of these crime scene investigations or crime scene cases are legal matters. And when they're legal matters, obviously legal ramifications exist for individuals that are perpetrators or individuals that are witnesses and that kind of thing. And so we need to keep a really precise log of all individuals that possess and analyze and touch and interact with the piece of evidence. You can kind of see, if you look closely at this chain of custody section within the inventory label, you'll notice that there are several lines that say received from, a date, and by, and time. Okay. You'll also notice.
See, even the chain of custody letter or document is sealed. So to say that these chain of custody letters or documents were contaminated, they're sealed. So how do you get that all this stuff that was gathered from that location was contaminated? There's lines that tell you who got what. Follow the trail.
Notice that individuals that receive the piece of evidence also have to sign over the top of the newly formed sealed flap to just put one more layer of added protection and one more layer of logging that they in fact have interacted with the evidence. We don't want anybody to tamper with the evidence. We don't want anybody to lose evidence. We want to keep everybody accountable. We want to hold the entire process accountable, everybody within the entire process accountable. And so you have to log if you interact with the evidence at all. Okay, even if you handle the evidence, you have to mark that you received it from somebody and that you are analyzing it and saying that you received it from them. So that's kind of the idea behind the chain of custody, logging who has seen and who has interacted with evidence, but also who has interacted with evidence, and then also how dry, liquid evidence is stored. Now we're getting into kind of the mapping of an outdoor crime scene. Again, we are looking for evidence. We're interacting with evidence, but we're now in an outdoor crime scene. Outdoor crime scenes should be marked off carefully, usually inside a rectangle or square, and that's basically because we want to make a quadrant. All of the evidence, just like any other crime scene, we have to make a quadrant, we have to set up our crime scene tape, we have to identify what the outer limits or outer boundaries of our crime scene is, and that way we can first establish a datum point and subdatum point. In this figure, the subdatum point is corner 1. Okay, so this would be our subdatum point. Mark the subdatum points with stakes or rebar pounded into the ground. In this case, we would have pounded in stakes in these corners, and that way, as you'll see later, if there's a piece of evidence within our quadrant, we actually can triangulate between our known distance. Okay, obviously our square is a known distance, a known value. And so if you know what this distance is, you can actually figure out what these distances are, and you can always reconstruct the crime scene in order to figure out exactly.
So think about this a little bit. That boot print that they found in the gravel or whatever, evidence marker number 3. Maybe they didn't even take that for evidence. Maybe they took that for what he's talking about right now, establishing a datum and subdatum point to see exactly where this individual came from, which makes a lot of sense. But I never thought of it that way until watching these videos. I'm like, okay, I remember reading about this, and it's very precise. But individuals just think, oh, they just walked around gathering these little pieces of evidence. Even that piece of paper in the front on the driveway with evidence marker number 4, that could have been a datum or subdatum point. Yeah, exactly, Jeff. Exactly.
Where that piece of evidence was. The location of any piece of evidence is recorded by measuring the distance to 2 reference lines along the perimeter of the scene. Again, we can either triangulate from both datum points, or we can triangulate from a particular side. Again, if we know this distance and we know this distance, we can figure out these distances and without a doubt put our piece of evidence right back where we found it when we want to go back, or if we want to go back and reconstruct the crime scene, which is really, really critical if pieces of evidence are believed to have been lost, if pieces of evidence are believed to have been left behind. Okay, there are some times or some instances when we need to go back to a crime scene and kind of reconstruct to kind of get a second opinion, kind of get a second look, or just analyze the scene, reinterpret the pieces of evidence that are there because there might have been something that was missed, overlooked.
And they might have to reconstruct the crime scene, or if they didn't already, because the house was torn down.
Okay. Analyzing evidence. All the evidence collected at a crime scene should be processed in a forensic lab. That makes sense, right? There are a lot of scientific analyses that are performed. Those need to obviously be done in a forensic lab. Most of the chemical, the toxicology, the microscopy, all of those things cannot be done in the field. They have to be done in a forensic lab, obviously where the equipment is. Okay, one of the analysis of the evidence is complete. The lead detective can generally use it for 4 purposes. They can link a suspect to a scene or a victim. They can establish the identity of a victim or a perpetrator, compare to eyewitness testimony, or acquit innocent persons. And so what that means is you have the ability to link a suspect to a scene based on evidence that was at the scene, right? If in a forensic lab you identify there are fingerprints that you can link to a particular suspect or a particular victim, if there's blood typing, if there's blood, if there's DNA, if there are hairs, fibers, you can obviously identify whether or not they match the suspect or match the victim. You can establish an identity of a victim or a perpetrator using, let's say, DNA technology, right? If the perpetrator or victim is unknown and you need to use dental records or you need to use DNA, you can actually establish an identity of an unknown suspect or an unknown individual based on a DNA profile. Compared to eyewitness testimony, you can obviously corroborate the eyewitness testimony with specific forensic evidence if it matches or not. And then acquit innocent persons if there is a person of interest or there's a perpetrator or a suspect that is.
So let me ask you this. Here's another question for you. Based on what he said, compared to eyewitness testimony. So do you believe that they would have put Dylan's testimony in there if they didn't have evidence to back up her testimony? Think about that a minute. We're just going to put this in the PCA, but we don't have any evidence to back up that this is what she saw. So that tells you that there's some kind of evidence that can corroborate her testimony. But people are so busy throwing up smoke screens and wanting you to believe that Dylan or Bethany were the perpetrators, or they knew about it. Think about that statement I just made. Establish the identity of the victim or perpetrator compared to the eyewitness testimony. Because you can't just take that into court and say, well, this is what I saw. Okay, well, do you have any evidence to support what you're claiming? How can you support this evidence? How do you put this person in the house with bushy eyebrows? Did the defendant have bushy eyebrows? Is he 5'10" or taller? Does he weigh 185 pounds? Athletic but not muscular? What we've seen is he pretty much matched the profile. But there has to be more evidence to support her claim, not just what was put in the PCA. People use that PCA as a Bible, and they want you to believe that that's it. And that's all the conflicting information. Come on. Use your thinking caps. Like I said earlier, if you can't dig it, get a bigger shovel.
Believed to have committed the crime, but the DNA doesn't match, the fingerprints don't match, the hair doesn't match, etc., then obviously you can acquit innocent persons within the lab, which is really, really important because we don't want to.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting this, but he just made an awesome point there too. To acquit innocent people. So the police not only go to try to build a case against a suspect, but they also build a case against eliminating people that aren't a potential suspect. So do you believe that as hard as they built the case to find Mr. Kohberger, they didn't also have an alternative case trying to see if it wasn't him? Think about that.
You don't want to sentence somebody that's innocent, right? That's really important. A detective's responsibilities. So a detective is responsible for reconstructing the crime scene objectively, and objectively is really, really important. It has to be based on facts, and that is based on evidence. Share all information with the defense lawyers. Defense lawyers obviously are the lawyers that are defending the perpetrator. Whether the perpetrator is guilty or innocent, that doesn't matter. There is due process in America, and so there is always a defense attorney that is defending the accused. Okay, and last thing we're going to talk about is the idea of a staged crime scene. So you've probably heard of situations in which crime scenes are staged, right, to throw off investigators, but crime scenes that are faked or staged can be challenging to analyze because you're not analyzing evidence as it was laid down or as it was deposited. You're actually analyzing evidence that was purposely dropped, okay, or purposely laid to construe a fake scene, right? So that's obviously challenging. Most stage crimes are one of the following. So arson, obviously, is a fire that is set intentionally to destroy evidence. of another crime, or an arson fire is staged to look like an accident. Some murders are staged to look like suicides, and burglary can be staged to collect insurance money. So there are a lot of instances, a lot of situations in which certain crime scenes are staged, or certain crimes are staged to look like other things. It is vital that a crime scene investigator looks at all of the information objectively and tries not to jump to conclusions, because again, if an investigator jumps to conclusions, they might follow the stagedness of the crime scene if they were to jump to conclusions, and instead of looking objectively at all of the pieces of evidence and trying to figure out exactly what happened objectively with facts, not not that perception that we talked about. Okay, so staged crime scenes are difficult, but are possible to work through. It just takes science. It takes forensic science. It takes a good quality investigation, looking at all the facts, looking objectively at the facts, and figuring out the truth. Okay, that's all we got. If you have questions, bring them to class. Otherwise, see ya.
All right, sorry, I stepped away for a second. I had to go take care of some business in the other room. You know, after sitting here for 2 hours and 31 minutes, after all the water and stuff I've been drinking, you know, stuff happens. So, what do y'all think? Give me some feedback. Is there anybody in the chat other than Jeff? Is there anybody still here? What did you think about the educational portion of this video? Did it clear up some things that maybe you've had questions about? Did it give you an alternate mode of information, that things that you've heard presented kind of, I'm not going to use the word debunk because people only know what they know, but does it give you the understanding of how this whole process works? That it isn't as simple as people make it in these chats, in these panels. They just gather DNA and then they send it to a lab, and then they send it to another lab, and then they finally got the dad DNA, and then they matched it up to BKs, and you know, how'd they not get BKs and all this? Come on. There's no evidence. They planted the sheath, and you know, there was 3 other DNAs on that sheath. Why aren't we talking about that? I just want to ask, how come you're so hardcore on BK's nutsack? That's what I want to know. Why are you a fanboy? That's what I want to know. Because if you think you've cracked the case, why aren't you presenting that on any of your platforms that you're, you know, some of these people that talk like that, they have channels. They have channels. Why don't they present their hypothesis or their theories and make it make sense on those channels, instead of coming into other channels and fact checking everything that people say? You know, if you're that educated, if you're that knowledgeable, make it make sense on your channel. Show your faces. Put the pieces together. Stick behind your stuff. If you're really that smart, take the leap. See, I'm willing to take the leap, because if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I can accept that. I don't care what other people think about me being right or wrong. But obviously, y'all care about being followed on being right rather than being wrong. You know? Let's see what these people got to say, what Rondi got to say. I understand there's so much that goes into an investigation. Yes. It really starts to become like debate class in high school, doesn't it? Where you're assigned to argue. Well, it's not even an argument. It's a fact checking. It's kind of like you have an educated or factual basis that you apply with knowledge that you've learned a certain way, but yet since the other side has dived into some other way of thinking, they're not open-minded enough to see your side because then they might be wrong. You know? Yeah, we do. But I believe that this change of venue is going to give this case a breath of fresh air. You know, it doesn't matter whether Brian is transferred the next 30 days or not. It doesn't matter if he's already there. You're going to hear all these things up until the new judge speaks because people have been given a reprieve to talk about stuff they have no clue what it means sometimes. And they're using people on their panels to be their source, where sometimes those people don't really have the information as correctly as they should either. That's why I present these videos, because I don't want to be the one saying it without somebody co-signing for it. And these videos co-sign for it because these are professionals. They're not just somebody on the street making a crime scene video, if that makes sense. They have to defend their stance or they have no content. Exactly. I thought it was something that should be required viewing to comment on true crime channels. I did too. See, when I got into this true crime arena, I thought that this was what I was getting into. I felt a little intimidated because I thought, well, dang, they're going to be breaking down the crime. They're going to be showing interviews. They're going to be showing, you know, how they break down the evidence. They're going to be talking about this. Wasn't none of that. It was people getting online on a daily basis talking about what we talked about yesterday and the day before for 3 hours and the day before for 3 hours. And we're going to talk about this creator. We're going to talk about that creator. And we're going to, you know, cross all this smoke screen to just keep our lack of knowledge on what we're talking about so you don't see it. You go into any of these panels, any of them, and you watch the creator. How many times do they say, I don't know? I say, I don't know when I don't know. But other than that, I'm pretty certain that what I'm saying, whether it's right or wrong, I'm still going to stand behind it. There's a lot of people who won't stand behind their thoughts, but they want you to believe in their expertise. So I go into a lot of these creators' lives and I don't talk a lot of times. I'm just listening. And I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're actually presenting something they know about. And I can tell you guys one thing. My instructor told me that Wikipedia is not a good source of information because it is changed daily by people that own that company. So you could write anything you want in a way that you want it written because you own the website. It's not like Google. So we can't use that as a reference point. Let's see what Jeff got to say. Is it possible that the Elantra could be alive and self-aware, kind of like Knight Rider? Ideas could run the gauntlet from wild and wacky to plausible and the same. You just never know, Jeff. It's the people that argue with no knowledge or understanding. That is why there's so much hostility and abuse. Exactly. And we have creators that say, oh, it is so simple. This case is so simple. It's so simple. But yet, your idea of the crime was that it happened in an apartment complex and you saw it through reflections and the perpetrators drove a Dodge Journey and it was seen on the 1320 cam and it sounded the same way that the vehicle sounded on the 1330 cam, loud and boisterous and lifted up with squeaky brakes and all this. You get what I'm saying? Do you get what I'm saying? You can make anything make sense. I was in a panel, not panel, but I was in the chat the other day and the creator was showing something and he's like, you hear that, right? You hear the name Kohberger. You hear it. They show the windy, I guess, 1320 cam, and it's loud, and all you hear is all kinds of stuff. And you hear the individual play like 10 seconds of it. He's like, at 10 seconds, you're going to hear the name Kohberger. And I'm all this thing trying to be like, okay, let me give this guy the benefit of the doubt. It get to 16 seconds. I'm like, I didn't hear a damn thing but like screeching and wind and, you know, all kinds of stuff. He played it like 3 or 4 times. Then he said, okay, let me play this other less noise video of the same video. And then he's playing it. And it goes from 10 seconds, 15 seconds. You don't hear a damn thing on that one. And you're like, and the chat's going, we don't hear nothing. It's like, make sure you got your headphones on. Make sure you got your earpods on. Because you're going to hear the name Kohberger. And me being the smart ass that I am, I left a comment on his page. And I said, oh, so you're saying since you hear the name Kohberger at Linda Lane, and you assume that, or you believe that the crimes were committed at Linda Lane, therefore Kohberger must be the killer. Is that what you're saying? Asking for a friend. Because is that not what the person essentially is saying? I just gave you a boom. That's what people say all the time. I just gave you a boom. I just gave you a boom. For what? Is this boom gonna get the guy out of jail because you heard a camera supposedly say his name? Can you imagine the prosecutors getting all this information on a daily? Or even the professional like Cy Ray or somebody, and these individuals are like, hey, Cy, I got something that I need to roll by you and I need your expertise on. Here, I want you to decipher this for me. So he gets the email, he opens it up, he starts listening, and he's like, well, I didn't hear anything. Honey, did you hear anything? All I heard was and it's like, okay. I don't want to be in that crowd. I want to be taken seriously for my channel. I don't want to be in that crowd. You know, Crime Circus, when I first started listening to people, and I'm going to name drop, I really followed him every day because he would have something presenting that was making so much sense. And I was like, man, this dude, this clown got it going on. He's really talking about facts. And then I then he started with alternative theories. I think it was the tunnels where he lost me, or actually parachuting into the balcony or something like that. I don't know if he was the one that said that, but that's where he lost me. So then I went to Grizzly True Crime, and I watched her for a long time. And she had a lot more insightful information. She was very thorough with her presentations. And I just stopped watching her because I started, I was going around looking for creators to watch. And this individual that I just spoke on, there was a new channel, and this channel had just started. Not very many, subs, but he was boots on the ground, right? It's not JLR, it was the other guy. And he had me, invested. He was good at, being non-biased, and he was good at presenting the information and giving the audience, what they wanted to see is, all this. And there was a lot of different creators on this one live. And they were walking around Linda Lane, and he was showing them Linda Lane, and he was showing them, the outline of the house and all this stuff. And I thought, man, this dude's pretty good. He's a local. He lived around there. Pretty good. And I'll tell you where the turning point came. It's when he received a phone call. He was in a hotel room. He received a phone call from a gentleman who was talking about drugs and the consistency of, the hierarchy. And this individual on the phone was talking about bishops and kings and queens and, all these things, kind of relating it to a chess game, right? And I thought, well, I've never heard of it kind of described like that, but, it kind of makes sense, I guess. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt. And then this individual that was on the phone eventually makes his way on the panel. And I was thinking, well, that's the guy that was on the phone. And that kind of, then they got another person on there, and they got another person on there. And then, that's when, all of a sudden they started growing that channel. And then they branched off just like a band does sometimes, Sometimes the lead singer becomes too big for the band, or the guitarist become too big for the band, and they got to go try their own ability to start their own band, even though they can't sing. You know what I mean? They can play the guitar, but they can't sing. So, that's what happens with these channels. Well, anyways, this channel was going along, and then the WSU Kim thing came out, and they had her on there. And they were pretty much believing it, just like everybody did when she came out. Every channel I would turn on, I would want to watch with her on there because she seemed to have some information that nobody else had. And at that time, I wasn't going to school. I was just listening to this case, and I was listening to understand it because this lady had some information that nobody else had. But then, for whatever reason, people started turning on her. And then Dave came out. And then Doc came out. And, it was one continuous cycle after the other. And then here we are 2.5 or 2 years later. We have people attacking a certain channel just because he's able to give a direction, or more or less because he's in touch with the family of one of the victims. I believe that's why they give him so much grief, is because, he gets some of his information through the family. And who are they to really say one way or the other where he can get his info, or if it's fake, or if it's sensationalized? Because you got one finger pointed at you, you got 3 fingers pointed back at yours, or you got one finger pointed at somebody. There it is. You got three fingers pointed back at you. So, these individuals that are pointing fingers at everybody, it just doesn't make sense. We got people coming out in this case, people that knew him in high school, can vouch for their parents and this and that. We got women that supposedly went on a Tinder date with him. We got people that were at a wedding reception with him. We got people talking about how creepy he was at a bar, how his name was this and his name was that, how his instructors were having issues with him. So I ask you, the people that knew him when he was younger, that are vouching for him, because that's what they're doing. Anytime that they say, well, I knew this person and he used to do this and they say that he's this and they say that he's that. Well, if you knew him in high school, let me ask you, are you the same person that you were in high school? You didn't grow one way or the other. You didn't grow more positive or more negative. You stayed the same person. But you don't know this person now, but you knew him in high school. So how are you free to talk about anything regarding this person? Have you went to visit him? Have you wrote him? Have you tried to write him? That's what I got to ask people. You have all these things that you push on these communities, but you don't answer any of these questions, or nobody's asking these questions. And anytime people do ask, what happens? We get timed out, or we get blocked, or we're made a mockery of, or we're called names, or we're made, our characters assassinated just because we're asking a question that is logical. So think about that. All these people that supposedly know this individual, have they wrote him? Have they tried to call the jail? Have they, been in contact with their mom, the dad, supposedly that they know him? But they can bring up all these other people and say, well, this person knew him and that person knew him, and there's no way Brian would do that, or there's no way Brian would have been like that. How the hell do you know? 10 years later, 12 years later, how would you know? When you say that you didn't keep up with the man after he went off to college, but yet you want to be credible in the things that you say? But people don't ask those questions. People don't ask those questions because they don't want to be viewed as the bad person, or get the wrath of this person cussing them out or calling them names and making fun of them or whatever. It's very childish. Because if we're made to present our receipts in order for us to be taken valid, how come these other people aren't made to present their receipts for their validity? Has this person ever showed any pictures of him with BK? His friends with Brian? Because I can tell you, anybody that I knew in high school, supposedly that was close, or even that I had any kind of ability to know about them, I would have pictures of those people at that time in life. Hell, there might even be pictures with me in them with those people at that time in life. But no, these people want you to take them at their word. And I'm not trying to start beef with anybody. I'm really not. I'm just trying to say that, you know what? You're free to believe what you want, but don't be pushing innocence so damn hard if you yourself cannot present any evidence of that innocence or your affiliation. Because present that information, I'll shut up. I'll say I'm wrong. I'll go publicly and say, you know what? I was wrong for judging this person. for talking like this about this person because that's my integrity. But until then, I'm free to think as I want as well as you are. And you wonder why these people decline my invitation to come up on my panel. I've invited countless creators to come up on my panel. Why don't they? They always have an excuse. Why don't they come up? Why don't they come up to have a conversation about what we're talking about right now? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Has he proved one iota of that acquaintance? Has he shown the world any pictures? Has he called the parent? No, he just has, it could be anybody on a camera saying, yeah, I knew him too. He was like this, he was like that. We're so quick to listen to these type of individuals, but yet when they're pushing facts like these videos are, they don't get the same kind of airplay. They don't get the same kind of credence because people don't want to know the truth. They really don't. This isn't true crime. This is gossip. This is the Inquirer. This is all those magazines that kept you buying every week, you know. Hell, even the TV Guide had those kind of articles where you would want to buy, or those hit paraders or whatever, you'd want to buy every week because you wanted to keep up with last week's narrative. And like I say, there's people that are members that know these people, and if you go back and talk to them about what I've said, you know, I stand behind mine. I'm not gonna bow out. But I can promise you this, you don't have permission to screenshot, record, and replay this. Now there's that. So if you're not a member and you see this being played on some other panel, let me know. Let me know. People are married to a person, they find out they don't know them at all, yet they know what the guy is capable of. Exactly. You shouldn't apologize. You know what? Sometimes people need to be held accountable. Anger doesn't control everybody. Just because you get angry on a panel and you start cussing me out does not make you any more mightier than me. Kind of like another guy. He was in my chat one day, and it was the day that I got called out. And I told you guys, if I suddenly shut this live down, it's because I got called out on a run. Well, this guy was causing all kinds of havoc in my chat, and I blocked him. And then I turned turned the stream off not long after. And he goes around all these other places that I'm talking about he shut my live down because of his behavior and all this. He shut me down. Yeah. See, I've worked with criminal-minded people for a long time. I know a criminal when I see them. I know a criminal when they talk. I know a criminal when they look at you. I can get a vibe from a person sitting 2 feet away from them. I can sense whether they're nervous, whether they're being genuine, whether they're lying to you, whether they're trying to manipulate you. I've been taught how to visualize verbal and nonverbal cues, you know? So I can tell you, I'm not the know-it-all, but I do have extensive education in a lot of different fields, you know? So you can debate me, you can debunk me, you can do all this stuff, you can dox me, you can do what you want to do. At the end of the day, and I hate that statement, but I'm going to use it right now. At the end of the day, I don't care. Because this is your life, it's not mine. You can tell how much invested you are in the YouTube world versus how invested I am. I get on here for a different purpose than you. There's a lot of people that get on here hoping that they get a date from one of the women in the chats or multiple women in the chats. So they got to be the tough guy. They got to be the funny guy. They got to be the smart ass. They got to do this, that, and the other. When you've reached a point in your life where that doesn't matter anymore, you're actually mature. You actually can be classified as an adult. But until then, it's just childish behavior. And you can have the masses to co-sign your work, but it still doesn't make it true to the person that's listening. There's quite a few of them that do that. Oh, there's some that hit on the creator. Low key. You just gotta look. You just gotta watch the chat. You gotta watch the chat. You will see who does. You will see who does it. Well, just go to these creators who you presume are kind of attractive. And you will see in the chat what goes on. And you will see if the creator is playing along as well, you know? Sometimes you get lost in the game because of all the side stuff that's going on. You can't keep up with what they're actually trying to present. But like I said, I'm not hiding behind the members only. I'll probably put this out there eventually. I don't care. I've gone through way more trials and tribulations in my real life than what YouTube could ever throw at me. And I'm still here. So, you know, you can cuss me out. You can make fun of my hair. You can make fun of the part. You can make fun of my teeth. You can make fun of my eyes. You can make fun of anything. It doesn't matter to me. Doesn't matter. Because in reality, most of these people that I'm talking about haven't even been on camera. And if they have, they haven't been on camera very long. Yeah, exactly. I've had people in my chats praising my work and then go to another chat and say the same thing about the other, which I don't care. I don't have control over how people view or think. What I'm merely saying is the obvious, you know, it's the obvious to me. So therefore, I'm speaking on it. Mind your own business. Well, you know what? If you weren't so blatant about it, I could ignore it. You know? No, Rondi. No. I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it. You see it, right? You see it, right? But anyway, Jeffrey, are you anywhere near your camera? Or am I going to have to call tonight and we'll do something tomorrow or the next day? Are you still listening? This is a world where some think the earth is round. This is a world where some think the earth is round and some think it's flat. Yeah, exactly. You know, I will give a creator props because I never thought I'd hear this side of this individual. JB Gunner. I've been watching his last two videos. And JB is an interesting cat. You know, he's an interesting man. He's an interesting man, but his last two lives, or his last two videos, he's spoken some fact. Didn't really cuss a lot, but he spoke a lot of fact. So I'm giving him some props on that. And Harsh as well. You know, I stopped watching Harsh a long time ago. Okay. Yeah, I've been on here for 3 hours, so it's about time for me to shut her down. I actually like the people that try to attack me because I can defend myself, but so many people don't chat out of fear of negativity. Yeah, that is sad. You know, I could have a live going on. There's 30 people watching it and 10 people chatting. It's sad. I hope the word gets out that this is a safe place. You know? But I'm going to get off here, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. The members that are the members only, I hope you enjoyed this. Even if it is 3 hours, you might have to watch it all in a week or something because there's a lot in here. Those of you that stayed with me in the chat, thank you so much. You be safe out there. And like I'm going to start to say, if you can't dig it, get a bigger shovel. Can you dig it? Can you dig it? Maestro, cue that music.